Alright, so last time on Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, we had the first task of the Triwizard Tournament. Harry used a summoning charm from long distance to get his firebolt, so then he could take to the skies to get past, well, to take the golden egg underneath the Hungarian horntail big black dragon. And, Harry knew what was coming in the task ahead because Hagrid kind of leaked it to him. And all the champions knew because Hagrid leaked it to Madame Maxime, and Karkaroff followed Hagrid and Madame Maxime, and then Harry ended up telling Cedric Diggory what the task was. So now that Harry has passed the first task, Harry and Ron are now friends again because Ron was very jealous of all the attention Harry was getting and thought that Harry entered the tournament himself when actually Harry's name was entered in by an unknown person for potentially nefarious reasons. And with the conclusion of the first task, we've now reached chapter 21, the House Elf Liberation Front. So this has to do with Spew, Hermione's elf rights thing. And that was pretty much the summary. And now I will start the reading. Chapter 21, the House Elf Liberation Front. Harry, Ron, and Hermione went up to the Owlery that evening to find Pigwidgeon, so that Harry could send Sirius a letter telling him that he had managed to get past his dragon unscathed. On the way, Harry filled Ron in on everything Sirius had told him about Karkaroff. Oh yeah, Sirius thinks Karkaroff might have put Harry's name in as potentially a nefarious actor. Though shocked at first to hear that Karkaroff had been a Death Eater, by the time they had entered the Owlery, Ron was saying that they ought to have suspected it all along. "Fits, doesn't it?" he said. "Remember what Malfoy said on the train about his dad being friends with Karkaroff? Now we know where they knew each other. They were probably running around in masks together at the World Cup. I'll tell you one thing, though, Harry. If it was Karkaroff who put your name in the goblet, he's going to be feeling pretty stupid now, isn't he? Didn't work, did it? You only got a scratch. Come here, I'll do it." Pigwidgeon was so overexcited at the idea of a delivery, he was flying around and around Harry's head, hooting incessantly. Ron snatched Pigwidgeon out of the air and held him still while Harry attached the letter to his leg. "There's no way any of the other tasks are going to be that dangerous. How could they be?" Ron went on as he carried Pigwidgeon to the window. "You know what? I reckon you could win this tournament, Harry. I'm serious." Harry knew that Ron was only saying this to make up for his behavior of the last few weeks, but he appreciated it all the same. Hermione, however, leaned against the Owlery wall, folded her arms, and frowned at Ron. "Harry's got a long way to go before he finishes this tournament," she said seriously. "If that was the first task, I hate to think what's coming next." "Right, little ray of sunshine, aren't you?" said Ron. "You and Professor Trelawney should get together sometime." He threw Pigwidgeon out of the window. Pigwidgeon plummeted 12 feet before managing to pull himself back up again. The letter attached to his leg was much longer and heavier than usual. Harry hadn't been able to resist giving Sirius a blow-by-blow account of exactly how he had swerved, circled, and dodged the horntail. They watched Pigwidgeon disappear into the darkness, and then Ron said, "Well, we better get downstairs for your surprise party, Harry. Fred and George should have nicked enough food from the kitchens by now." Sure enough, when they entered the Gryffindor common room, it exploded with cheers and yells again. There were mountains of cakes and flagons of pumpkin juice and butterbeer on every surface. Lee Jordan had let off some of Filibuster's fireworks so that the air was thick with stars and sparks. And Dean Thomas, who was very good at drawing, had put up some impressive new banners, most of which depicted Harry zooming around the Horntail's head on his firebolt, though a couple showed Cedric with his head on fire. Harry helped himself to food. He had almost forgotten what it was like to feel properly hungry, and sat down with Ron and Hermione. He couldn't believe how happy he felt. He had Ron back on his side. He'd gotten through the first task, and he wouldn't have to face the second one for 3 months. "Blimey, this is heavy," said Lee Jordan, picking up the golden egg, which Harry had left on a table, and weighing it in his hands. "Open it, Harry. Go on. Let's just see what's inside it." "He's supposed to work out the clue on his own," Hermione said swiftly. "It's in the tournament rules." "I was supposed to work out how to get past the dragon on my own, too," Harry muttered, so that only Hermione could hear him, and she grinned rather guiltily. "Yeah, go on, Harry, open it," several people echoed. Lee passed Harry the egg, and Harry dug his fingernails into the groove that ran all the way around it and prized it open. It was hollow and completely empty, but the moment Harry opened it, the most horrible noise, a loud and screechy wailing, filled the room. The nearest thing to it Harry had ever heard was the ghost orchestra at Nearly Headless Nick's Death Day party, who had all been playing the musical Saw. "Shut it," Fred bellowed, his hands over his ears. "What was that?" said Seamus Finnegan, staring at the egg as Harry slammed it shut again. "Sounded like a banshee. Maybe you've got to get past one of those next, Harry." "It was someone being tortured," said Neville, who had gone very white and spilled sausage rolls all over the floor. "You're gonna have to fight the Cruciatus curse." "Don't be a prat, Neville. That's illegal," said George. "They wouldn't use the Cruciatus curse on the champions. I thought it sounded a bit like Percy singing. Maybe you've got to attack him while he's in the shower, Harry." "Want a jam tart, Hermione?" said Fred. Hermione looked doubtfully at the plate he was offering her. Fred grinned. "It's all right," he said. "I haven't done anything to them. It's the custard creams you've got to watch." Neville, who had just bitten into a custard cream, choked and spat it out. Fred laughed. "Just my little joke, Neville." Hermione took a jam tart. Then she said, "Did you get all this from the kitchens, Fred?" "Yup," said Fred, grinning at her. He put on a high-pitched squeak and imitated a house elf. "Anything we can get you, sir. Anything at all. They're dead helpful. Give me a roast ox if I said I was peckish." "How do you get in there?" Hermione said in an innocently casual sort of voice. "Easy," said Fred. "Concealed door behind a painting of a bowl of fruit. Just tickle the pear and it giggles, and—" He stopped and looked suspiciously at her. "Why?" "Nothing," said Hermione quickly. "Going to try to lead the house elves out on strike now, are you?" said George. "Going to give up all the leaflet stuff and try and stir them up into rebellion?" Several people chortled. Hermione didn't answer. "Don't you go upsetting them and telling them they've got to take clothes and salaries," said Fred warningly. "You'll put them off their cooking." Just then, Neville caused a slight diversion by turning into a large canary. "Oh, sorry, Neville," Fred shouted over all the laughter. "I forgot. It was the custard creams we hexed." Within a minute, however, Neville had molted, and once his feathers had fallen off, he reappeared looking entirely normal. He even joined in laughing. "Canary creams," Fred shouted to the excitable crowd. "George and I invented them. 6 sickles each. A bargain." It was nearly 1 in the morning when Harry finally went up to the dormitory with Ron, Neville, Seamus, and Dean. Before he pulled the curtains of his 4-poster shut, Harry set his tiny model of the Hungarian horntail on the table next to his bed, where it yawned, curled up, and closed its eyes. Really, Harry thought, as he pulled the hangings of his 4-poster closed. Hagrid had a point. They were all right, really. Dragons. The start of December brought wind and sleet to Hogwarts. Drafty though the castle always was in winter, Harry was glad of its fires and thick walls every time he passed the Durmstrang ship on the lake, which was pitching in the high winds, its black sails billowing against the dark skies. He thought the Beaubaton caravan was likely to be pretty chilly, too. Hagrid, he noticed, was keeping Madame Maxime's horses well provided with a preferred drink of single malt whiskey. The fumes wafting through the trough in the corner of their paddock was enough to make the entire Care of Magical Creatures class lightheaded. This was unhelpful, as they were still tending the horrible Scroots and needed their wits about them. "I'm not sure whether they hibernate or not," Hagrid told the shivering class in the windy pumpkin patch next lesson. "Thought we'd just try and see if they fancied a kip. We'll just settle them down in these boxes." There were now only 10 Scroots left. Apparently their desire to kill one another had not been exercised out of them. Each of them was now approaching 6 feet in length. Their thick gray armor, their powerful scuttling legs, their fire-blasting ends, their stings and their suckers, combined to make Scroots the most repulsive things Harry had ever seen. The class looked dispiritedly at enormous boxes Hagrid had brought out, all lined with pillows and fluffy blankets. "We'll just lead 'em in here," Hagrid said, "and put the lids on, and we'll see what happens." But the Scroots, it transpired, did not hibernate, and did not appreciate being forced into pillow-lined boxes and nailed in. Hagrid was soon yelling, "Don't panic now, don't panic," while the Scroots rampaged around the pumpkin patch, now strewn with the smoldering wreckage of the boxes. Most of the class, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle in the lead, had fled into Hagrid's cabin through the back door and barricaded themselves in. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, however, were among those who remained outside trying to help Hagrid. Together, they managed to restrain and tie up 9 of the Scroots, though at the cost of numerous burns and cuts. Finally, only 1 Scroot was left. "Don't frighten him now," Hagrid shouted as Ron and Harry used their wands to shoot jets of fiery sparks at the Scroot, which was advancing menacingly on them, its sting arched, quivering over its back. "Just try and slip the rope round his sting so he won't hurt any of the others." "Yeah, we wouldn't want that," Ron shouted angrily as he and Harry backed into the wall of Hagrid's cabin, still holding the Scroot off with their sparks. Well, 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 this does look like fun. Rita Skeeter was leaning on Hagrid's garden fence, looking in at the mayhem. She was wearing a thick magenta cloak with a furry purple collar today, and her crocodile skin handbag was over her arm. Hagrid launched himself forward on top of the Scroot that was cornering Harry and Ron and flattened it. A blast of fire shot out of its end, withering the pumpkin plants nearby. "Who are you?" Hagrid asked Rita Skeeter as he slipped a loop of rope around the Scroot's sting and tightened it. "Rita Skeeter, Daily Prophet reporter," Rita replied, beaming at him. Her gold teeth glinted. "Thought Dumbledore said you weren't allowed inside the castle anymore," said Hagrid, frowning slightly as he got off the slightly squashed Scroot and started tugging it over to its fellows. Rita acted as though she hadn't heard what Hagrid had said. "What are these fascinating creatures called?" she asked, beaming still more widely. "Blast-ended Scroots," grunted Hagrid. "Really?" said Rita, apparently full of lively interest. "I've never heard of them before. Where did they come from?" Harry noticed a dull red flush rising up out of Hagrid's wild black beard, and his heart sank. Where had Hagrid got the Scroots from? Hermione, who seemed to be thinking along these lines, said quickly, "They're very interesting, aren't they? Aren't they, Harry?" "What? Oh yeah. Ouch. Interesting," said Harry as she stepped on his foot. "Ah, you're here, Harry," said Rita Skeeter as she looked around. "So you like Care of Magical Creatures, do you? One of your favorite lessons?" "Yes," said Harry stoutly. Hagrid beamed at him. "Lovely," said Rita. "Really lovely. Been teaching long?" she asked to Hagrid. Harry noticed her eyes travel over to Dean, who had a nasty cut across one cheek, Lavender, whose robes were badly singed, Seamus, who was nursing several burnt fingers, and then to the cabin windows where most of the class stood, their noses pressed against the glass, waiting to see if the coast was clear. "This is only me second year," said Hagrid. "Lovely. I don't suppose you'd like to give an interview, would you? Share some of your experience of magical creatures. The Prophet does the zoological column every Wednesday. I'm sure you know. We could feature these, bang-ended scoots. Blast-ended scroots, Hagrid said eagerly. Yeah, why not? Harry had a very bad feeling about this, but there was no way of communicating it to Hagrid without Rita Skeeter seeing, so he had to stand and watch in silence as Hagrid and Rita Skeeter made arrangements to meet in the Three Broomsticks for a good long interview later that week. Then the bell rang up at the castle, signaling the end of the lesson. Well, goodbye, Harry, Rita Skeeter called merrily to him as he set off with Ron and Hermione. Until Friday night then, Hagrid. She'll twist everything he says, Harry said under his breath. Just as long as he didn't import those scroots illegally or anything, said Hermione desperately. They looked at one another. It was exactly the sort of thing Hagrid might do. Hagrid's been in loads of trouble before, and Dumbledore's never sacked him, said Ron consolingly. Worst that can happen is Hagrid'll have to get rid of the scroots. Sorry, did I say worst? I meant best. Hagrid and Hermione laughed, and, feeling slightly more cheerful, went off to lunch. Harry thoroughly enjoyed double divination that afternoon. They were still doing star charts and predictions, but now that he and Ron were friends once more, the whole thing seemed very funny again. Professor Trelawney, who had been so pleased with the pair of them when they had been predicting their own horrific deaths, quickly became irritated as they sniggered through her explanation of the various ways in which Pluto could disrupt everyday life. I would think, she said, in a mystical whisper that did not conceal her obvious annoyance, that some of us, she stared very meaningfully at Harry, might be a little less frivolous had they seen what I have seen during my crystal gazing last night. As I sat here, absorbed in my needlework, the urge to consult the orb overpowered me. I arose, I settled myself before it, and I gazed into its crystalline depths. And what do you think I saw gazing back at me? An ugly old bat in outsized specs, Ron muttered under his breath. Harry fought hard to keep his face straight. Death, my dears. Parvati and Lavender both put their hands over their mouths, looking horrified. Yes, said Professor Trelawney, nodding impressively. It comes ever closer. It circles overhead like a vulture, ever lower over the castle. She stared pointedly at Harry, who yawned very widely and obviously. It'd be a bit more impressive if she hadn't done it about 80 times before, Harry said as they finally regained the fresh air of the staircase beneath Professor Trelawney's room. But if I'd drop dead every time she told me I'm going to, I'd be a medical miracle. You'd be a sort of extra concentrated ghost, said Ron, chortling, as they passed the Bloody Baron going in the opposite direction, his wide eyes staring sinisterly. At least we didn't get homework. I hope Hermione got loads off Professor Vector. I love not working when she is. But Hermione wasn't at dinner, nor was she in the library when they went to look for her afterward. The only person in there was Victor Crumb. Ron hovered behind the bookshelves for a while, watching Crumb, debating in whispers with Harry whether he should ask for an autograph. But then Ron realized that 6 or 7 girls were lurking in the next row of books, debating exactly the same thing, and he lost his enthusiasm for the idea. Wonder where she's got to, Ron said as he and Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower. Dunno. Balderdash. But the fat lady had barely begun to swing forward when the sound of racing feet behind them announced Hermione's arrival. Harry, she panted, skidding to a halt beside him. The fat lady stared down at her, eyebrows raised. Harry, you've got to come. You've got to come. The most amazing thing's happened. Please. She seized Harry's arm and started to try to drag him back along the corridor. What's the matter? Harry said. I'll show you when we get there. Oh, come on, quick. Harry looked around at Ron. He looked back at Harry, intrigued. Okay, Harry said, starting off back down the corridor with Hermione, Ron hurrying to keep up. Oh, don't mind me, the fat lady called irritably after them. Don't apologize for bothering me. I'll just hang here, wide open, until you get back, shall I? Yeah, thanks, Ron shouted over his shoulder. Hermione, where are we going? Harry asked, after she had led them down through 6 floors and started down the marble staircase into the entrance hall. You'll see in a minute, said Hermione excitedly. She turned left at the bottom of the staircase and hurried toward the door through which Cedric Diggory had gone the night after the Goblet of Fire had regurgitated his and Harry's names. Harry had never been through here before. He and Ron followed Hermione down a flight of stone steps, but instead of ending up in a gloomy underground passage like the one that led to Snape's dungeon, they found themselves in a broad stone corridor, brightly lit with torches and decorated with cheerful paintings that were mainly of food. "Oh, hang on," said Harry slowly, halfway down the corridor. "Wait a minute, Hermione." "What?" She turned around to look at him, anticipation all over her face. "I know what this is about," said Harry. He nudged Ron and pointed to the painting just behind Hermione. It showed a gigantic silver fruit bowl. "Hermione," said Ron, cottoning on, "you're trying to rope us into that spew stuff again." No, I'm not," she said hastily. "And it's not spew, Ron." "Changed the name, have you?" said Ron, frowning at her. "What are we now, then? The House Elf Liberation Front? I'm not barging into that kitchen and trying to make them stop work. I'm not doing it." "I'm not asking you to," Hermione said impatiently. "I came down here just now to talk to them all, and I found... Oh, come on, Harry, I want to show you." She seized his arm again, pulled him in front of the picture of the giant fruit bowl, stretched out her forefinger, and tickled the huge green pear. It began to squirm, chuckling, and suddenly turned into a large green door handle. Hermione seized it, pulled the door open, and pushed Harry hard in the back, forcing him inside. He had one brief glimpse of an enormous, high-ceilinged room, large as the great hall above it, with mounds of glittering brass pots and pans heaped around the stone walls, and a great brick fireplace on the other end, when something small hurtled toward him from the middle of the room, squealing, "Harry Potter, sir! Harry Potter!" Next second, all the wind had been knocked out of him as the squealing elf hit him hard in the midriff, hugging him so tightly he thought his ribs would break. "Dobby!" Harry gasped. "It is Dobby, sir, it is," squealed the voice from somewhere around his navel. "Dobby has been hoping and hoping to see Harry Potter, sir, and Harry Potter has come to see him, sir." Dobby let go and stepped back a few paces, beaming up at Harry, his enormous, green, tennis ball-shaped eyes brimming with tears of happiness. He looked almost exactly as Harry remembered him, the penciled-shaped nose, the bat-like ears, the long fingers and feet, all except the clothes, which were very different. When Dobby had worked for the Malfoys, he had always worn the same filthy old pillowcase. Now, however, he was wearing the strangest assortment of garments Harry had ever seen. He had done an even worse job of dressing himself than the wizards at the World Cup. He was wearing a tea cozy for a hat, on which he had pinned a number of bright badges, a tie patterned with horseshoes over a bare chest, a pair of what looked like children's soccer shorts and odd socks. One of these, Harry saw, was the black one Harry had removed from his own foot and tricked Mr. Malfoy into giving Dobby, thereby setting Dobby free. The other one was covered in pink and orange stripes. "Dobby, what are you doing here?" Harry said in amazement. "Dobby has come to work at Hogwarts, sir," Dobby squealed excitedly. "Professor Dumbledore gave Dobby and Winky jobs, sir." "Winky?" said Harry. "She's here too." "Yes, sir, yes," said Dobby, and he seized Harry's hand and pulled him off into the kitchen between the 4 long wooden tables that stood there. Each of these tables, Harry noticed as he passed them, was positioned exactly beneath the 4 house tables above in the great hall. At the moment, they were clear of food, dinner having finished, but he supposed that an hour ago they had been laden with dishes that were then sent up through the ceiling to their counterparts above. At least 100 little elves were standing around the kitchen, beaming, bowing, and curtsying as Dobby led Harry past them. They were all wearing the same uniform, a tea towel stamped with the Hogwarts crest and tied, as Winky's had been, like a toga. Dobby stopped in front of the brick fireplace and pointed. "Winky, sir," he said. Winky was sitting on a stool by the fire. Unlike Dobby, she had obviously not foraged for clothes. She was wearing a neat little skirt and blouse with a matching blue hat, which had holes in it for her large ears. However, while every one of Dobby's strange collection of garments was so clean and well cared for that it looked brand new, Winky was plainly not taking care of her clothes at all. There were soup stains all down her blouse and a burn in her skirt. "Hello, Winky," said Harry. Winky's lip quivered. Then she burst into tears, which spilled out her great brown eyes and splashed down her front, just as they had done at the Quidditch World Cup. "Oh dear," said Hermione. She and Ron had followed Harry and Dobby to the end of the kitchen. "Winky, don't cry. Please don't." But Winky cried harder than ever. Dobby, on the other hand, beamed up at Harry. "Would Harry Potter like a cup of tea?" he squeaked loudly over Winky's sobs. Yeah, okay," said Harry. Instantly, about 6 house elves came trotting up behind them, bearing a large silver tray laden with a teapot, cups for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, a milk jug, and a large plate of biscuits. "Good service," Ron said in an impressed voice. Hermione frowned at him, but the elves all looked delighted. They bowed very low and retreated. "How long have you been here, Dobby?" Harry asked as Dobby handed around the tea. "Only a week, Harry Potter, sir," said Dobby happily. "Dobby came to see Professor Dumbledore, sir. You see, sir, it is very difficult for a house elf who has been dismissed to get a new position, sir. Very difficult indeed." At this, Winky howled even harder, her squashed tomato of a nose dribbling all down her front, though she made no effort to stem the flow. "Dobby has traveled the country for 2 whole years, sir, trying to find work," Dobby squeaked. "But Dobby hasn't found work, sir, because Dobby wants paying now." The house elves all around the kitchen, who had been listening and watching with interest, all looked away at these words, as though Dobby had said something rude and embarrassing. Hermione, however, said, "Good for you, Dobby." "Thank you, miss," said Dobby, grinning toothfully at her. "But most wizards don't want a house elf who wants paying, miss. That's not the point of a house elf, they says," and they slammed the door in Dobby's face. "Dobby likes work, but he wants to wear clothes and he wants to be paid, Harry Potter. Dobby likes being free." The Hogwarts house elves had now started edging away from Dobby, as though he were carrying something contagious. Winky, however, remained where she was, though there was a definite increase in the volume of her crying. "And then, Harry Potter, Dobby goes to visit Winky, and finds out Winky has been freed too, sir," said Dobby delightedly. At this, Winky flung herself forward off her stool and lay face down on the flagged stone floor, beating her tiny fists upon it and positively screaming with misery. Hermione hastily dropped down to her knees beside her and tried to comfort her, but nothing she said made the slightest difference. Dobby continued with his story, shouting shrilly over Winky's screeches. "And then Dobby had the idea, Harry Potter, sir. Why doesn't Dobby and Winky find work together, Dobby says. Where is there enough work for 2 house elves, says Winky. And Dobby thinks, and it comes to him, sir, Hogwarts. So Dobby and Winky came to see Professor Dumbledore, sir, and Professor Dumbledore took us on." Dobby beamed very brightly, and happy tears welled in his eyes again. "And Professor Dumbledore says he will pay Dobby, sir, if Dobby wants paying. And so Dobby is a free elf, sir, and Dobby gets a galleon a week and 1 day off a month." "That's not very much," Hermione shouted indignantly from the floor over Winky's continued screaming and fist-beating. "Professor Dumbledore offered Dobby 10 galleons a week and weekends off," said Dobby, suddenly giving a little shiver, as though the prospect of so much leisure and riches were frightening. "But Dobby beat him down, miss. Dobby likes freedom, miss, but isn't wanting too much, miss. He likes work better." "And how much is Professor Dumbledore paying you, Winky?" Hermione asked kindly. If she had thought this would cheer up Winky, she was wildly mistaken. Winky did stop crying, but when she sat up she was glaring at Hermione through her massive brown eyes, her whole face sopping wet and suddenly furious. "Winky is a disgraced elf, but Winky is not yet getting paid," she squeaked. "Winky is not sunk so low as that. Winky is properly ashamed of being freed." "Ashamed," said Hermione blankly. But Winky, come on. It's Mr. Crouch who should be ashamed, not you. You didn't do anything wrong. He was really horrible to you. But at these words, Winky clapped her hands over the holes in her hat, flattening her ears so she couldn't hear a word, and screeched, "You is not insulting my master, miss. You is not insulting Mr. Crouch. Mr. Crouch is a good wizard, miss. Mr. Crouch is right to sack bad Winky." "Winky is having trouble adjusting, Harry Potter," squeaked Dobby confidentially. "Winky forgets she is not bound to Mr. Crouch anymore. She is allowed to speak her mind now, but she won't do it." "Can't house elves speak their minds about their masters, then?" Harry asked. "Oh, no, sir, no," said Dobby, suddenly looking serious. "'Tis a part of a house elf's enslavement, sir. We keeps their secrets and our silence, sir. We upholds the family's honor, and we never speaks ill of them, though Professor Dumbledore told Dobby he does not insist upon this. Professor Dumbledore said we is free to... Dobby suddenly looked nervous and beckoned Harry closer. Harry bent forward. Dobby whispered, "He said we is free to call him a barmy old codger if we likes, sir." Dobby gave a frightened sort of giggle. "But Dobby is not wanting to, Harry Potter," he said, talking normally again, and shaking his head so that his ears flapped. "Dobby likes Professor Dumbledore very much, sir, and is proud to keep his secrets and our silence for him." "But what can you say... But you can say what you'd like about the Malfoys now," Harry asked him, grinning. A slightly fearful look came into Dobby's immense eyes. Dobby could," he said doubtfully. He squared his small shoulders. "Dobby could tell Harry Potter that his old masters were bad dark wizards." Dobby stood there for a moment, quivering all over, horror-struck by his own daring. Then he rushed over to the nearest table and began banging his head on it very hard, squealing, "Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby!" Harry seized Dobby by the back of his tie and pulled him away from the table. "Thank you, Harry Potter, thank you," said Dobby breathlessly, rubbing his head. "You just need a bit of practice," Harry said. "Practice!" squealed Winky furiously. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Dobby, talking that way about your masters." "They isn't my masters any more, Winky," said Dobby defiantly. "Dobby doesn't care what they think any more." "Oh, you is a bad elf, Dobby," moaned Winky, tears leaking down her face once more. "My poor Mr. Crouch, what is he doing without Winky? He is needing me. He is needing my help. I's looking after the Crouches all my life, and my mother is doing it before me, and my grandmother is doing it before her. Oh, what is they saying if they knew Winky was freed? Oh, the shame, the shame." She buried her face in her skirt again and bawled. "Winky," said Hermione firmly, "I'm quite sure Mr. Crouch is getting along quite perfectly well without you. We've seen him, you know." "You is seeing my master," said Winky breathlessly, raising her tear-stained face out of her skirt once more and goggling at Hermione. "You is seeing him here at Hogwarts." "Yes," said Hermione. "He and Mr. Bagman are judges in the Triwizard Tournament." "Mr. Bagman comes too," squeaked Winky, and to Harry's great surprise, and Ron's and Hermione's too by the looks of their faces, she looked angry again. "Mr. Bagman is a bad wizard, a very bad wizard. My master isn't liking him. Oh no, not at all." "Bagman bad," said Harry. "Oh yes," Winky said, nodding her head furiously. "My master is telling Winky some things, but Winky is not saying. Winky keeps her master's secrets." She dissolved yet again in tears. They could hear her sobbing into her skirt. Poor master, no Winky to help him no more." They couldn't get another sensible word out of Winky. They left her to her crying and finished their tea, while Dobby chatted happily about his life as a free elf and his plans for his wages. "Dobby is going to buy a sweater next, Harry Potter," he said happily, pointing at his bare chest. "Tell you what, Dobby," said Ron, who seemed to have taken a great liking to the elf. "I'll give you the one my mom knits me this Christmas. I always get one from her. You don't mind maroon, do you?" Dobby was delighted. "We might have to shrink it a bit to fit you," Ron told him, "but it'll go well with your tea cozy." As they prepared to take their leave, many of the surrounding elves pressed in upon them, offering snacks to take back upstairs. Hermione refused, with a pained look at the way the elves kept bowing and curtsying. but Ron and Harry loaded their pockets with cream cakes and pies. "Thanks a lot," Harry said to the elves, who had all clustered around the door to say goodnight. "See you, Dobby." "Harry Potter, can Dobby come and see you sometime, sir?" Dobby asked tentatively. "Of course you can," said Harry, and Dobby beamed. "You know what," said Ron, once he, Hermione, and Harry had left the kitchens behind them and were climbing the stairs into the entrance hall again. "All these years I've been really impressed with Fred and George, nicking food from the kitchens. Well, it's not exactly difficult, is it? They can't wait to give it away." "I think this is the best thing that could have happened to those elves, you know," said Hermione, leading the way back up the marble staircase. "Dobby coming to work here, I mean. The other elves will see how happy he is, being free, and it'll slowly dawn on them that they want that too." "Let's hope they don't look too closely at Winky," said Harry. "Oh, she'll cheer up," said Hermione, though she sounded a bit doubtful. "Once the shock's worn off, and she's got used to Hogwarts, she'll see how much better off she is without that Crouch man." "She seems to love him," said Ron thickly. He had just started on a cream cake. "Doesn't think much of Bagman, though, does she?" said Harry. "Wonder what Crouch says at home about him." "Probably says he's not a very good head of department," said Hermione. "And let's face it, he's got a point, hasn't he?" "I'd still rather work for him than old Crouch," said Ron. "At least Bagman's got a sense of humor." Don't let Percy hear you saying that," Hermione said, smiling slightly. "Yeah, well, Percy wouldn't want to work for anyone with a sense of humor, would he?" said Ron, now starting on a chocolate eclair. "Percy wouldn't recognize a joke if it danced naked in front of him, wearing Dobby's tea cozy." End of chapter 21. Lots of elf dialogue in that one. How we doing? Oh, there's only 2 people here. I hope you're enjoying it, though. Maybe I ought to link up the stream on the other YouTube channel. Let people know that it's live. Maybe the elf dialogue turned people away. It's more fun with listeners, I think. Oops. I'm gonna post a link to it on the just try to get some more couple more people tuning in. Alright, probably not much more elf dialogue happening here, so if that was irksome, we're past it. Alright, chapter 22, The Unexpected Task. "Potter, Weasley, will you pay attention?" Professor McGonagall's irritated voice cracked like a whip through the Transfiguration class on Thursday, and Harry and Ron both jumped and looked up. It was the end of the lesson. They had finished their work. The guinea fowl they had been changing into guinea pigs had been shut away in a large cage on Professor McGonagall's desk. Neville's still had feathers. They had copied down their homework from the blackboard. Describe, with examples, the ways in which transforming spells must be adapted when performing cross-species switches. The bell was due to ring at any moment, and Harry and Ron, who had been having a sword fight with a couple of Fred and George's fake wands at the back of the class, looked up, Ron holding a tin parrot and Harry a rubber haddock. "Now that Potter and Weasley have been kind enough to act their age," said Professor McGonagall with an angry look at the pair of them, as the head of Harry's paddock drooped and fell silently to the floor. Ron's parrot's beak had severed it moments before. "I have something to say to you all. The Yule Ball is approaching, a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament, and an opportunity for us to socialize with our foreign guests. Now, the ball will be Open only to 4th years and above, although you may invite a younger student if you wish. Lavender Brown let out a shrill giggle. Pavarti Patil nudged her hard in the ribs, her face working furiously as she too fought not to giggle. They both looked around at Harry. Professor McGonagall ignored them, which Harry thought was distinctly unfair, as she had just told off him and Ron. Dress robes will be worn, Professor McGonagall continued, and the ball will start at 8 o'clock on Christmas Day, finishing at midnight in the Great Hall. Now then. Professor McGonagall stared deliberately around the class. The Yule Ball is, of course, a chance for us all to, let our hair down, she had said in a disapproving voice. Lavender giggled harder than ever, with her hand pressed hard against her mouth to stifle the sound. Harry could see what was funny this time. Professor McGonagall, with her hair in a tight bun, looked as though she had never let her hair down in any sense. But that does not mean, Professor McGonagall went on, that we will be relaxing the standards of behavior we expect from the Hogwarts students. I will be most seriously displeased if a Gryffindor student embarrasses the school in any way. The bell rang, and there was the usual scuffle of activity as everyone packed their bags and swung them onto their shoulders. Professor McGonagall called above the noise, "Potter, a word, if you please." Assuming this had something to do with his headless rubber haddock, Harry proceeded gloomily to the teacher's desk. Professor McGonagall waited until the rest of the class had gone, and then said, "Potter, the champions and their partners." "What partners?" said Harry. Professor McGonagall looked suspiciously at him, as though she thought he was trying to be funny. "Your partners for the Yule Ball, Potter," she said coldly. "Your dance partners." Harry's insides seemed to curl up and shrivel. "Dance partners?" He felt himself going red. "I don't dance," he said quickly. "Oh, yes you do," said Professor McGonagall irritably. "That's what I'm telling you. Traditionally, the champions and their partners open the ball." Harry had a sudden mental image of himself in a top hat and tails, accompanied by a girl in the sort of frilly dress Aunt Petunia always wore to Uncle Vernon's work parties. "I'm not dancing," he said. "It is traditional," said Professor McGonagall firmly. "You are a Hogwarts champion, and you will do what is expected of you as a representative of the school, so make sure you get yourself a partner, Potter." "But I don't—" "You heard me, Potter," said Professor McGonagall in a very final sort of way. Would I enter the Triwizard Tournament? No. A week ago, Harry would have said finding a partner for a dance would be a cinch compared to taking on a Hungarian horntail, but now that he had done the latter and was facing the prospect of asking a girl to the ball, he thought he'd rather have another round with the dragon. Harry had never known so many people to put their names down to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas. He always did, of course, because the alternative was usually going back to Privet Drive, but he had always been very much in the minority before now. This year, however, everyone in the 4th year and above seemed to be staying, and they all seemed to Harry to be obsessed with the coming ball, or at least all the girls were, and it was amazing how many girls Hogwarts suddenly seemed to hold. He had never quite noticed that before. Girls giggling and whispering in the corridors, girls shrieking with laughter as boys passed them, girls excitedly comparing notes on what they were going to wear on Christmas night. "Why did they have to move in packs?" Harry asked Ron as a dozen or so girls walked past them, sniggering and staring at Harry. "How are you supposed to get one on their own to ask them?" "Lasso one," Ron suggested. "Got any idea who you're gonna ask?" Harry didn't answer. He knew perfectly well whom he'd like to ask, but working up the nerve was something else. Cho was a year older than he was. She was very pretty. She was a very good Quidditch player, and she was also very popular. Ron seemed to know what was going on inside Harry's head. "Listen, you're not going to have any trouble. You're a champion. You've just beaten a Hungarian horntail. I bet they'll be queuing up to go with you." In tribute to their recently repaired friendship, Ron had kept the bitterness in his voice to a bare minimum. Moreover, to Harry's amazement, he turned out to be quite right. A curly-haired third-year Hufflepuff girl, whom Harry had never spoken in his life, asked him to go to the ball with her the very next day. Harry was so taken aback he said no before he'd even stopped to consider the matter. The girl walked off looking rather hurt, and Harry had to endure Dean's, Seamus's, and Ron's taunts about her all through History of Magic. The following day, 2 more girls asked him, a second year, and, to his horror, a 5th year who looked as though she might knock him out if he refused. "She was quite good-looking," said Ron fairly, after he'd stopped laughing. "She was a foot taller than me," said Harry, still unnerved. "Imagine what it looked like trying to dance with her." Hermione's words about Krum kept coming back to him. They only like him because he's famous. Harry doubted very much if any of the girls who had asked to be his partners so far would have wanted to go to the ball with him if he hadn't been a school champion. Then he wondered if this would bother him if Cho asked him. On the whole, Harry had to admit, even with the embarrassing prospect of opening the ball before him, life had definitely improved since he had gotten through the first task. He wasn't attracting nearly as much unpleasantness in the corridors anymore, which he suspected had a lot to do with Cedric. He had an idea Cedric might have told the Hufflepuffs to leave Harry alone in gratitude for Harry's tip-off about the dragons. There seemed to be fewer Support Cedric Diggory badges around, too. Draco Malfoy, of course, was still quoting Rita Skeeter's article to him at every possible opportunity, but he was getting fewer and fewer laughs out of it, and, just to heighten Harry's feelings of well-being, no story about Hagrid had appeared in the Daily Prophet. "She didn't seem very interested in magical creatures, to tell you the truth," Hagrid said, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione asked him how his interview with Rita Skeeter had gone during his last Magical Creatures lesson of the term. To their very great relief, Hagrid had given up on direct contact with the Scroots now. They were merely sheltering behind his cabin today, sitting at a trestle table and preparing a fresh selection of food with which to tempt the Scroots. "She just wanted me to talk about you, Harry," Hagrid continued in a low voice. "Well, I told her we'd been friends since I went to fetch you from the Dursleys. Never had to tell him off in 4 years," she said. "Never played you up in lessons, has he?" I told her no, and she didn't seem happy at all. You'd think she wanted me to say you were horrible, Harry. "Course she did," said Harry, throwing lumps of dragon liver into a large metal bowl and picking up his knife to cut some more. "She can't keep writing about what a tragic little hero I am. It'll get boring." "She wants a new angle, Hagrid," said Ron wisely as he shelled salamander eggs. "You were supposed to say Harry's a mad delinquent." "But he's not," said Hagrid, looking genuinely shocked. "She should have interviewed Snape," said Harry grimly. "He'd give her all the goods on me any day. Potter has been crossing lines ever since he first arrived at this school." "Said that, did he?" said Hagrid, while Ron and Hermione laughed. "Well, you might have bent a few rules, Harry, but you're all right, really, aren't you?" "Cheers, Hagrid," said Harry, grinning. "You coming to this ball thing on Christmas Day, Hagrid?" said Ron. "Thought I might look in on it, yeah," said Hagrid gruffly. "Should be a good do, I reckon. You'll be open the dancing, won't you, Harry? Who are you taking?" "No one yet," said Harry, feeling himself going red again. Hagrid didn't pursue the subject. The last week of term became increasingly boisterous as it progressed. Rumors about the Yule Ball were flying everywhere, though Harry didn't believe half of them. For instance, that Dumbledore had bought 800 barrels of mulled mead from Madame Rosmerta. It seemed to be fact, however, that he had booked the Weird Sisters. Exactly who or what the Weird Sisters were, Harry didn't know, never having had access to a wizard's wireless, but he deduced from the wild excitement of those who had grown up listening to the WWN, Wizarding Wireless Network, that they were a very famous musical group. Some of the teachers, like little Professor Flitwick, gave up trying to teach them much when their minds were so clearly elsewhere. He allowed them to play games in his lesson on Wednesday and spent most of it talking to Harry about the perfect summoning charm Harry had used during the first task of the Triwizard Tournament. Other teachers were not so generous. Nothing would ever deflect Professor Binns, for example, from plowing on through his notes on goblin rebellions. As Binns hadn't let his own death stand in the way of continuing to teach, they supposed a small thing like Christmas wasn't going to put him off. It was amazing how he could make even bloody and vicious goblin riots sound as boring as Percy's Cauldron Bottom report. Professors McGonagall and Moody kept them working until the very last second of their lessons too, and Snape, of course, would no sooner let them play games in class than adopt Harry. Staring nastily around at them all, he informed them that he would be testing them on poison antidotes during the last lesson of the term. Evil he is, Ron said bitterly that night in the Gryffindor common room. Springing a test on us on the last day, ruining the last bit of term with a whole load of studying. You're not exactly straining yourself, though, are you? Said Hermione, looking at him over the top of her potions notes. Ron was busy building a card castle out of his exploding snap pack, a much more interesting pastime than with Muggle cards, because of the chance the whole thing would blow up at any second. It's Christmas, Hermione, said Harry lazily. He was rereading Flying with the Cannons for the 10th time in an armchair near the fire. Hermione looked severely over at him, too. I'd have thought you'd be doing something constructive, Harry, even if you don't want to learn your antidotes. Like what? Harry said as he watched Joey Junkins of the Cannons belt a bludger towards the Ballycastle Bat's chaser. That egg, Hermione hissed. Come on, Hermione, I've got till February the 24th, Harry said. He had put the golden egg upstairs in his trunk and hadn't opened it since the celebration party after the first task. There were still 2.5 months to go until he needed to know what the screeching wailing meant after all. But it might take weeks to work it out, said Hermione. You're going to look like a real idiot if everyone else knows what the next task is and you don't. Leave him alone, Hermione. He's earned a bit of a break, said Ron. And he placed the last 2 cards on top of the castle, and the whole lot blew up, singeing his eyebrows. Nice look, Ron. It'll go well with your dress robes, that will. It was Fred and George. They sat down at the table with Harry, Ron, and Hermione, as Ron felt out how much damage had been done. Ron, can we borrow Pigwidgeon? George asked. No, he's off delivering a letter, said Ron. Why? Because George wants to invite him to the ball, said Fred sarcastically. Because we want to send a letter, you stupid great prat, said George. Who do you two keep writing to, eh? Said Ron. Nose out, Ron, or I'll burn that for you too, said Fred, waving his wand threateningly. So, you lot got dates for the ball yet? Nope, said Ron. Well, you'd better hurry up, mate, or all the good ones will be gone. Who are you going with then? Said Ron. Angelina, said Fred promptly, without a trace of embarrassment. What? Said Ron, taken aback. You've already asked her. Good point, said Fred. He turned his head and called across the common room. Oi, Angelina! Angelina, who had been chatting with Alicia Spinnet near the fire, looked over at him. What? She called back. Want to come to the ball with me? Angelina gave Fred an appraising sort of look. All right, then, she said, and turned back to Alicia and carried on chatting with a bit of a grin on her face. There you go, said Fred to Ron and Harry. Piece of cake. He got to his feet, yawning, and said, We'd better use the school owl then, George. Come on. They left. Ron stopped feeling his eyebrows and looked across the smoldering wreck of his card castle at Harry. We should get a move on, Ask someone. He's right. We don't want to end up with a pair of trolls. Hermione let out a sputter of indignation. A pair of what, excuse me? Well, said Ron, shrugging. I'd rather go alone than with Eloise Midgen, say. Her acne's loads better lately, and she's really nice. Her nose is off-center, said Ron. Oh, I see, Hermione said, bristling. So basically, you're going to take the best-looking girl who'll have you, even if she's completely horrible. Yeah, that sounds about right, said Ron. I'm going to bed, Hermione snapped, and she swept off toward the girls' staircase without another word. The Hogwarts staff, demonstrating a continued desire to impress the visitors from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, seemed determined to show the castle at its best this Christmas. When the decorations went up, Harry noticed that they were the most stunning he had yet seen inside the school. Everlasting icicles had been attached to the banisters of the marble staircase. The usual 12 Christmas trees in the Great Hall were bedecked with everything from luminous holly berries to real hooting golden owls, and the suits of armor had all been bewitched to sing carols whenever anyone passed them. It was quite something to hear "O come, all ye faithful," sung by an empty helmet that only knew half the words. Several times, Filch, the caretaker, had to extract Peeves from inside the armor, where he had taken to hiding, filling in the gaps in the song with lyrics of his own invention, all of which were very rude. And still, Harry hadn't asked Cho to the ball. He and Ron were getting very nervous now, though as Harry pointed out, Ron would look much less stupid than he would without a partner. Harry was supposed to be starting the dancing with the other champions. "I suppose there's always Moaning Myrtle," he said gloomily, referring to the ghost who haunted the girls' toilets on the second floor. "Harry, we just gotta grit our teeth and do it," said Ron on Friday morning, in a tone that suggested they were planning the storming of an impregnable fortress. "When we get back to the common room tonight, we'll both have partners. Agreed?" Okay," said Harry. But every time he glimpsed Cho that day, during break, and then lunchtime, and then once on the way to History of Magic, she was surrounded by friends. Didn't she ever go anywhere alone? Could he perhaps ambush her as she was going to the bathroom? But no, she seemed to even go there with an escort of 4 or 5 girls. Yet if he didn't do it soon, she was bound to have been asked by someone else. He found it hard to concentrate on Snape's potions test, and consequently forgot to add the key ingredient, a bezoar, meaning he received bottom marks. He didn't care, though. He was too busy screwing up his courage for what he was about to do. When the bell rang, he grabbed his bag and hurried to the dungeon door. "I'll meet you at dinner," he said to Ron and Hermione, and he dashed off upstairs. He'd just have to ask Cho for a private word, that was all. He hurried off through the packed corridors looking for her, and sooner than he expected, he found her emerging from a Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson. Cho, could I have a word with you?" Giggling should be made illegal, Harry thought furiously, as all the girls around Cho started doing it. She didn't, though. She said, "Okay," and followed him out of earshot of her classmates. Harry turned to look at her, and his stomach gave a weird lurch, as though he had missed a step going downstairs. He said. He couldn't ask her. He couldn't, but he had to. Cho stood there looking puzzled, watching him. The words came out before Harry had quite got his tongue around them. "Want to go to the ball with me?" "Sorry," said Cho. Do you want to go to the ball with me?" said Harry. Why did he have to go red now? Why? "Oh," said Cho, and she went red too. "Oh, Harry, I'm really sorry," and she truly looked it. "I've already said I'd go with someone else." "Oh," said Harry. It was odd. A moment before, his insides had been writhing like snakes, but suddenly he didn't seem to have any insides at all. "Oh, okay," he said. "No problem." "I'm really sorry," she said again. "That's okay," said Harry. They stood there looking at each other, and then Cho said, "Well, yeah," said Harry. "Well, bye," said Cho, still very red. She walked away. Harry called after her before he could stop himself. "Who are you going with?" "Oh, Cedric," she said. "Cedric Diggory." "Oh, right," said Harry. His insides had come back again. It felt as though they had been filled with lead in their absence. Completely forgetting about dinner, he walked slowly back up to Gryffindor Tower, Cho's voice echoing in his ears with every step he took. "Cedric! Cedric Diggory!" He had been starting to quite like Cedric, prepared to overlook the fact that he had once beaten him at Quidditch, and was handsome and popular, and nearly everyone's favorite champion. Now he suddenly realized that Cedric was in fact a useless pretty boy who didn't have enough brains to fill an egg cup. "Fairy lights," he said dully to the fat lady. The password had been changed the previous day. "Yes, indeed, dear," she trilled, straightening her new tinsel hair band as she swung forward to admit him. Entering the common room, Harry looked around, and to his surprise he saw Ron sitting ashen-faced in a distant corner. Ginny was sitting with him, talking to him in what seemed to be a low, soothing voice. "What's up, Ron?" said Harry, joining them. Ron looked up at Harry, a sort of blind horror in his face. Why did I do it? He said wildly. I don't know what made me do it. What? Said Harry. Just ask Fleur Delacour to go to the ball with him, said Ginny. She looked as though she was fighting back a smile, but she kept patting Ron's arm sympathetically. You what? Said Harry. I don't know what made me do it, Ron gasped again. What was I playing at? There were people all around. I've gone mad. Everyone watching. I was just walking past her in the entrance hall. She was standing there talking to Diggory, and it sort of came over me, and I asked her. Ron moaned and put his head in his hands. He kept talking, though his words were barely distinguishable. She looked at me like I was a sea slug or something, didn't even answer, and then, I don't know, I sort of just came to my senses and I ran for it. She's part Vila, said Harry. You were right, her grandmother was one. It wasn't your fault. I bet you just walked past when she was turning on the old charm for Diggory and got a blast of it. But she was wasting her time. He's going with Cho Chang. Ron looked up. I asked her to go with me just now, Harry said dully, and she told me. Ginny had suddenly stopped smiling. This is mad, said Ron. We're the only ones left who haven't got anyone. Well, except Neville. Hey, guess who he asked? Hermione. What? Said Harry, completely distracted at the startling news. Yeah, I know, said Ron, some of the color coming back into his face as he started to laugh. He told me after potions. Said she's always been really nice, helping him out with work and stuff. But she told him she's already going with someone else. Ha, as if. She just didn't want to go with Neville. I mean, who would? Don't, said Ginny, annoyed. Don't laugh. Oh, 1 second. Fix this shit. Where is this? Here it is. Alright, we're back. Just then, Hermione climbed in through the portrait hole. Why weren't you two at dinner? She said, coming over to join them. Because... Oh, shut up laughing, you two. Because they've both just been turned down by girls they asked to the ball, said Ginny. That shut Harry and Ron up. Thanks a bunch, Ginny, said Ron sourly. All the good-looking ones taken, Ron, said Hermione loftily. Eloise Midgen's starting to look quite pretty now, is she? Well, I'm sure you'll find someone somewhere who will have you. But Ron was staring at Hermione, as though suddenly seeing her in a whole new light. Hermione, Neville's right. You are a girl. Oh, well spotted, she said acidly. Well, you can come with one of us. No, I can't, snapped Hermione. Oh, come on, he said impatiently. We need partners. We're going to look really stupid if we haven't got any. Everyone else has. I can't come with you, said Hermione, now blushing, because I'm already going with someone. No, you're not, said Ron. You just said that to get rid of Neville. Oh, did I? Said Hermione, and her eyes flashed dangerously. Just because it's taking you 3 years to notice, Ron, doesn't mean no one else has spotted that I'm a girl. Ron stared at her. Then he grinned again. Okay, we know you're a girl, he said. That too. Will you come with us now? I've already told you, Hermione said very angrily. I'm going with someone else. And she stormed off toward the girls' dormitories again. She's lying, said Ron flatly, watching her go. She's not, said Ginny quietly. Who is it then? Said Ron sharply. I'm not telling you, it's her business, said Ginny. Right, said Ron, who looked extremely put out. This is getting stupid. Ginny, you can go with Harry, and I'll just... I can't, said Ginny, and she went scarlet too. I'm going with Neville. He asked me when Hermione said no, and I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to get to go otherwise. I'm not in 4th year. She looked extremely miserable. I think I'll go and have dinner, she said, and she got up and walked off to the portrait hole, her head bowed. Ron goggled at Harry. What's got into them? He demanded. But Harry had just seen Parvati and Lavender come in through the portrait hole. The time had come for drastic action. Wait here, he said to Ron, and he stood up, walked straight to Parvati, and said, Parvati, will you go to the ball with me? Parvati went into a fit of giggles. Harry waited for them to subside, his fingers crossed in the pocket of his robes. "Yes, all right then," she said finally, blushing furiously. "Thanks," said Harry in relief. "Lavender, will you go with Ron?" "She's going with Seamus," said Parvati, and the pair of them giggled harder than ever. Harry sighed. "Can't you think of anyone who'd go with Ron?" he said, lowering his voice so that Ron wouldn't hear. "What about Hermione Granger?" said Parvati. "She's going with somebody else." Parvati looked astonished. "Oh, who?" she said keenly. Harry shrugged. "No idea," he said. "So what about Ron?" "Well," said Parvati slowly, "I suppose my sister might. Padma, you know, in Ravenclaw. I'll ask her if you'd like." "Yeah, that would be great," said Harry. "Let me know, will you?" And he went over back to Ron, feeling that this ball was a lot more trouble than it was worth, and hoping very much that Padma Patil's nose was dead center. End of chapter 22. Yeah, there's more stuff with Cho, I think, in at least in Order of the Phoenix, if not even further in. I have trouble remembering how it plays out, but the Yule Ball is quite memorable, and that is in fact the next chapter. Chapter 23, the Yule Ball. Here we go. Despite the very heavy load of homework that the fourth years had been given for the holidays, Harry was in no mood to work when the term ended, and spent the week leading up to Christmas enjoying himself as fully as possible along with everyone else. Gryffindor Tower was hardly less crowded now than during term time. It seemed to have shrunk slightly too, as its inhabitants were being so much rowdier than usual. Fred and George had had a great success with their canary creams, and for the first couple of days of the holidays, people kept bursting into feather all over the place. Before long, however, all the Gryffindors had learned to treat food anyone else offered them with extreme caution, in case it had a canary cream concealed in the center. And George confided to Harry that he and Fred were now working on developing something else. Harry made a mental note never to accept so much as a crisp from Fred and George in the future. He still hadn't forgotten Dudley and the Tun-Tung Toffee. Snow was falling thickly upon the castle and its grounds now. The pale blue Beaubaton carriage looked like a large, chilly, frosted pumpkin next to the ice gingerbread house that was Hagrid's cabin, while the Durmstrang ship's portholes were glazed with ice, the rigging white with frost. The house elves down in the kitchen were outdoing themselves with a series of rich, warming stews and savory puddings, and only Fleur Delacour seemed to be able to find anything to complain about. "It is too heavy, all this Hogwarts food," they heard her saying grumpily as they left the great hall behind her one evening, Ron skulking behind Harry, keen to not be spotted by Fleur. "I will not fit into my dress robes." "Oh, there's a tragedy," Hermione snapped as Fleur went into the entrance hall. "She really thinks a lot of herself, that one, doesn't she?" "Hermione, who are you going to the ball with?" said Ron. He kept springing this question on her, hoping to startle her into a response by asking it when she least expected it. However, Hermione merely frowned and said, "I'm not telling you. You'll just make fun of me." "You're joking, Weasley," said Malfoy behind them. "You're not telling me someone's asked that to the ball, not the long-mullered mudblood." Harry and Ron both whipped around, but Hermione said loudly, waving to someone over Malfoy's shoulder, "Hello, Professor Moody." Malfoy went pale and jumped backward, looking wildly around for Moody, but he was still up at the staff table finishing his stew. "Twitchy little ferret, aren't you, Malfoy?" said Hermione scathingly, and she, Harry, and Ron went up the marble staircase, laughing heartily. "Hermione," said Ron, looking sideways at her, suddenly frowning. "Your teeth. What about them?" she said. "Well, they're different. I've just noticed." "Of course they are. Did you expect me to keep those fangs Malfoy gave me?" No, I mean, they're different to how they were before he put that hex on you. They're all straight and normal-sized. Hermione suddenly smiled very mischievously, and Harry noticed it too. It was a very different smile from the one he remembered. Well, when I went up to Madame Pomfrey to get them shrunk, she held up a mirror and told me to stop her when they went back to how they normally were, she said. And I just let her carry on a bit. She smiled even more widely. Mom and Dad won't be too pleased. I've been trying to persuade them to let me shrink them for ages, but they wanted me to carry on with my braces. You know, they're dentists. They don't think teeth and magic should. Look, Pigwidgeon's back. Ron's tiny owl was twittering madly at the top of the icicle-laden banisters, a scroll of parchment tied to his leg. People passing him were pointing and laughing, and a group of third-year girls paused and said, "Oh, look at the weenie owl, isn't it cute?" "Stupid little feathery git," Ron hissed, hurrying up the stairs and snatching up Pigwidgeon. "You bring letters to the addressee. You don't hang around showing off." Pigwidgeon hooted happily, his head protruding over Ron's fist. The third-year girls all looked very shocked. "Clear off," Ron snapped at them, waving the fist holding Pigwidgeon, who hooted more happily than ever as he soared through the air. "Here, take it, Harry," Ron added in an undertone as the third-year girls scuttled away looking scandalized. He pulled Sirius's reply off Pigwidgeon's leg. Harry pocketed it, and then they went back to Gryffindor Tower to read it. Everyone in the common room was much too busy and letting off more holiday steam to observe what anyone else was up to. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down apart from everyone else by a dark window that was gradually filling up with snow, and Harry read out, "Dear Harry, congratulations on getting past the Horntail. Whoever put your name in that goblet shouldn't be feeling too happy right now. I was going to suggest a conjunctivitis curse, as the dragon's eyes are its weakest point." "That's what Crumb did," Hermione whispered. "But your way was better. I'm impressed. Don't get complacent, though, Harry. You've only one task. Whoever put you in for the tournament You've only done one task. Whoever put you in for the tournament's got plenty more opportunity if they're trying to hurt you. Keep your eyes open, particularly when the person we discussed is around, and concentrate on keeping yourself out of trouble. Keep in touch. I still want to hear about anything unusual. Sirius." "He sounds exactly like Moody," said Harry quietly, tucking the letter away inside his robes. "Constant vigilance. You think I walk around with my eyes shut, banging off the walls." "But he's right, Harry," said Hermione. "You have still got 2 tasks to do. You really ought to have a look at that egg, you know, and start working out what it means." "Hermione, he's got ages," snapped Ron. "Want a game of chess, Harry?" "Yeah, okay," said Harry. Then, spotting the look on Hermione's face, he said, "Come on, how am I supposed to concentrate with all this noise going on? I won't even be able to hear the egg over this lot." "Oh, I suppose not," she sighed, and she sat down to watch their chess match, which culminated in an exciting checkmate of Ron's, involving a couple of recklessly brave pawns and a very violent bishop. Harry awoke very suddenly on Christmas Day. Wondering what had caused his abrupt return to consciousness, he opened his eyes and saw something with very large, round, green eyes staring back at him in the darkness, so close that they were almost nose to nose. "Dobby!" Harry yelled, scrambling away from the elf so fast he almost fell out of bed. "Don't do that." "Dobby is sorry, sir," squeaked Dobby anxiously, jumping backward with his long fingers over his mouth. "Dobby is only wanting to wish Harry Potter Merry Christmas and bring him a present, sir. Harry Potter did say Dobby could come visit him sometimes, sir." "It's okay," said Harry, still breathing rather faster than usual. Will his heart rate returned to normal. Just prod me or something in the future, all right? Don't bend me over like that." Harry pulled back the curtains around his four-poster, took his glasses from his bedside table, and put them on. His yell had awoken Ron, Seamus, Dean, and Neville. All of them were peering through the gaps in their own hangings, heavy-eyed and tussle-haired. "Someone attacking you, Harry?" Seamus asked sleepily. "No, it's just Dobby," Harry muttered. "Go back to sleep." "Nah, presents," said Seamus, spotting the large pile at the foot of his bed. Ron, Dean, and Neville decided that now that we're awake, they might as well go down to some present opening, too. get down to some present opening, too. Harry turned back to Dobby, who was now standing nervously next to Harry's bed, still looking worried that he had upset Harry. There was a Christmas bauble tied to the loop on top of his tea cozy. "Can Dobby give Harry Potter his present?" he squeaked tentatively. "Course you can," said Harry. I've got something for you, too." It was a lie. He hadn't bought anything for Dobby at all, but he quickly opened his trunk and pulled out a particularly knobby, rolled-up pair of socks. They were his oldest and foulest, mustard yellow, and once belonged to Uncle Vernon. The reason they were extra knobbly was that Harry had been using them to cushion his sneakoscope for over a year now. He pulled out the sneakoscope and handed the socks to Dobby, saying, "Sorry, I forgot to wrap them." But Dobby was utterly delighted. "Socks are Dobby's favorite clothes, sir," he said, ripping off his odd ones and pulling on Uncle Vernon's. "I has 7 now, sir. But, sir," he said, his eyes widening, having pulled both socks up to their highest extent, so that they reached the bottom of his shorts. "They has made a mistake in the shop, Harry Potter. They is giving you 2 of the same." "Ah, no, Harry, how come you didn't spot that?" said Ron, grinning over from his own bed, which was now strewn with wrapping paper. "Tell you what, Dobby, here you go. Take these 2 and you can mix them up properly. And here's your sweater." He threw Dobby a pair of velvet socks he had just unwrapped, and the hand-knitted sweater Mrs. Weasley had sent. Dobby looked quite overwhelmed. "Sir is very kind," he squeaked, his eyes brimming with tears again, bowing deeply to Ron. "Dobby knew Sir must be a great wizard, for he is Harry Potter's greatest friend, but Dobby did not know that he was also as generous of spirit, as noble, as selfless." "They're only socks," said Ron, who had gone slightly pink around his ears, though he looked rather pleased all the same. "Wow, Harry." He had just opened Harry's present, a Chudley Cannon hat. "Cool." He jammed it onto his head, where it clashed horribly with his hair. Dobby now handed Harry a small package, which turned out to be socks. "Dobby is making them himself, sir," the elf said happily. "He is buying the wool out of his wages, sir." The left sock was bright red and had a pattern of broomsticks upon it. The right sock was green with a pattern of snitches. They're really... "Well, thanks, Dobby," said Harry, and he pulled them on, causing Dobby's eyes to leak with happiness again. "Dobby must go now, sir. We is already making Christmas dinner in the kitchens," said Dobby, and he hurried out of the dormitory, waving goodbye to Ron and the others as he passed. Harry's other presents were much more satisfactory than Dobby's odd socks, with the obvious exception of the Dursleys, which consisted of a single tissue, an all-time low. Harry supposed they too were remembering the Tun-Tung Toffee. Hermione had given Harry a book called Quidditch Teams of Britain and Ireland, Ron a bulging bag of dung bombs, Sirius a handy penknife with attachments to unlock any lock and undo any knot, and Hagrid a vast box of sweets, including all of Harry's favorites: Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans, Chocolate Frogs, Drooble's Best Blowing Gum, and Fizzing Whizbees. There was also, of course, Mrs. Weasley's usual package, including a new sweater, green, with a picture of a dragon on it. Harry supposed Charlie had told her about the horntail. And a large quantity of homemade mince pies. Harry and Ron met up with Hermione in the common room, and they went down to breakfast together. They spent most of the morning in Gryffindor Tower, where everyone was enjoying their presents, then returned to the Great Hall for a magnificent lunch, which included at least 100 turkeys and Christmas puddings, and large piles of Cribbage's wizarding crackers. They went out onto the grounds in the afternoon. The snow was untouched except for the deep channels made by the Durmstrang and Beauxbatons students on their way up to the castle. Hermione chose to watch Harry and the Weasleys snowball fight rather than join in, and at 5 o'clock she said she was going back upstairs to get ready for the ball. "What, you need 3 hours?" said Ron, looking at her incredulously, and paying for his lapse in concentration when a large snowball, thrown by George, hit him hard on the side of the head. "Who are you going with?" he yelled after Hermione, but she just waved and disappeared up the stone steps into the castle. There was no Christmas tea today, as the ball included a feast, so at 7 o'clock, when it had become hard to aim properly, the others abandoned their snowball fight and trooped back into the common room. The fat lady was sitting in her frame with her friend Violet from downstairs, both of them extremely tipsy, empty boxes of chocolate liquors littering the bottom of her picture. "Larry fights, that's the one," she giggled when they gave the password, and she swung forward to let them inside. Harry, Ron, Seamus, Dean, and Neville changed into their dress robes up in their dormitory, all of them looking very self-conscious, but none as much as Ron, who surveyed himself in the long mirror in the corner with an appalled look on his face. There was just no getting around the fact that his robes looked more like a dress than anything else. In a desperate attempt to make them look more manly, he used a severing charm on the ruff and cuffs. It worked fairly well, at least he was now lace-free, although he hadn't done a very neat job, and the edges looked depressingly frayed as the boys set off downstairs. "I still can't work out how you two got the best-looking girls in the year," muttered Dean. "Animal magnetism," said Ron gloomily, pulling stray threads out of his cuffs. The common room looked strange, full of people wearing different colors instead of the usual mass of black. Parvati was waiting for Harry at the foot of the stairs. She looked very pretty indeed, in robes of shocking pink, with her long, dark plait braided with gold, and gold bracelets glimmering at her wrists. Harry was relieved to see that she was not giggling. "You, look nice," he said awkwardly. "Thanks," she said. "Padma's going to meet you at the entrance hall," she added to Ron. "Right," said Ron, looking around. "Where's Hermione?" Parvati shrugged. "Shall we go down then, Harry?" "Okay," said Harry, wishing he could just stay in the common room. Fred winked at Harry as he passed him on the way out of the portrait hall. The entrance hall was packed with students too, all milling around waiting for 8 o'clock, when the doors to the great hall would be thrown open. Those people who were meeting partners from different houses were edging through the crowd trying to find one another. Parvati found her sister, Padma, and led her over to Harry and Ron. "Hi," said Padma, who was looking just as pretty as Parvati, in robes of bright turquoise. She didn't look too enthusiastic about having Ron as a partner, though. Her dark eyes lingered on the frayed neck and sleeves of his dress robes as she looked him up and down. "Hi," said Ron, not looking at her, but staring around at the crowd. Oh no. He bent his knees slightly to hide behind Harry, because Fleur Delacour was passing, looking stunning in robes of silver-gray satin, and accompanied by the Ravenclaw Quidditch captain, Roger Davies. When the head disappeared, Ron stood straight up again and stared over the heads of the crowd. "Where is Hermione?" he said again. A group of Slytherins came up the steps from their dungeon common room. Malfoy was in front. He was wearing dress robes of black velvet with a high collar, which in Harry's opinion made him look like a vicar. Pansy Parkinson, in frilly robes of pale pink, was clutching Malfoy's arm. Crabbe and Goyle were both wearing green. They resembled moss-colored boulders, and neither of them, Harry was pleased to see, had managed to find a partner. The oak front doors opened, and everyone turned to look as the Durmstrang students entered with Professor Karkaroff. Krum was at the front of the party, accompanied by a pretty girl in blue robes Harry didn't know. Over the heads he saw that an area of lawn right in front of the castle had been transformed into a sort of grotto full of fairy lights, meaning hundreds of actual living fairies were sitting in the rose bushes that had been conjured there, and fluttering over the statues of what seemed to be Father Christmas and his reindeer. Then Professor McGonagall's voice called, "Champions over here, please." Parvati readjusted her bangles, beaming. She and Harry said, "See you in a minute," to Ron and Padma, and walked forward, the chattering crowd parting to let them through. Professor McGonagall, who was wearing dress robes of red tartan, had arranged a rather ugly wreath of thistles around the brim of her hat, told them to wait on one side of the doors while everyone else went inside. They were to enter the great hall in procession when the rest of the students had sat down. Fleur and Roger Davies stationed themselves nearest the doors. Davies looked so stunned by his good fortune in having Fleur for a partner that he could hardly take his eyes off her. Cedric and Cho were close to Harry too. He looked away from them so he wouldn't have to talk to them. His eyes fell instead on the girl next to Krum. His jaw dropped. It was Hermione. But she didn't look like Hermione at all. She had done something with her hair. It was no longer bushy but sleek and shiny, and twisted up into an elegant knot at the back of her head. She was wearing robes made of a floaty, periwinkle blue material, and she was holding herself differently somehow. Or maybe it was merely the absence of the 20 or so books she usually had slung over her back. She was also smiling, rather nervously, it was true, but the reduction in the size of her front teeth was more noticeable than ever. Harry couldn't understand how he hadn't spotted it before. "Hi, Harry," she said. "Hi, Parvati." Parvati was gazing at Hermione in unflattering disbelief. She wasn't the only one either. When the doors to the Great Hall opened, Crumb's fan club from the library stalked past, throwing Hermione looks of deepest loathing. Pansy Parkinson gaped at her as she walked by with Malfoy, and even he didn't seem to be able to find an insult to throw at her. Ron, however, walked right past Hermione without looking at her. Once everyone else was settled in the hall, Professor McGonagall told the champions and their partners to get in line in pairs and to follow her. They did so, and everyone in the Great Hall applauded as they entered and started walking up towards the large round table at the top of the hall where the judges were sitting. The walls of the hall had all been covered in sparkling silver frost, with hundreds of garlands and mistletoe and ivy crossing the starry black ceiling. The house tables had vanished. Instead, there were about 100 smaller lantern-lit ones, each seating about a dozen people. Harry concentrated on not tripping over his feet. Parvati seemed to be enjoying herself. She was beaming around at everyone, steering Harry so forcefully that he felt as though he were a show dog she was putting through its paces. He caught sight of Ron and Padma as he neared the top table. Ron was watching Hermione pass with narrowed eyes. Padma was looking sulky. Dumbledore smiled happily as the champions approached the top table, but Karkaroff wore an expression remarkably like Ron's as he watched Krum and Hermione draw nearer. Ludo Bagman, tonight in robes of bright purple with large yellow stars, was clapping as enthusiastically as any of the students, and Madame Maxime, who had changed her usual uniform of black satin for a flowing gown of lavender silk, was applauding them politely. But Mr. Crouch, Harry suddenly realized, was not there. The fifth seat at the table was occupied by Percy Weasley. When the champions and their partners reached the table, Percy drew out the empty chair beside him, staring pointedly at Harry. Harry took the hint and sat down next to Percy, who was wearing brand new navy blue dress robes and an expression of such smugness that Harry thought it ought to be fined. "I've been promoted," Percy said before Harry could even talk, and from his tone he might have been announcing his election as the supreme ruler of the universe. "I'm now Mr. Crouch's personal assistant, and I'm here representing him." "Why didn't he come?" Harry asked. He wasn't looking forward to being lectured on cauldron bottoms all through dinner. "I'm afraid to say Mr. Crouch isn't well. Not well at all. Hasn't been right since the World Cup. Hardly surprising. Overwork. He's not as young as he was, though still quite brilliant, of course. The mind remains as great as it ever was. But the World Cup was a fiasco for the whole ministry, and then Mr. Crouch suffered a huge personal shock with the misbehavior of that house elf of his, Blinky or whatever she was called. Naturally, he dismissed her immediately afterward, but, well, as I say, he's getting on. He needs looking after, and I think he's found a definite drop in his home comforts since she left. And then we had the tournament to arrange, and the aftermath of the cup to deal with. That revolting Skeeter woman buzzing around. No, poor man. He's having a well-earned, quiet Christmas. I'm just glad he knew he had someone to rely on to take his place." Harry wanted very much to ask whether Mr. Crouch had stopped calling Percy Weatherby yet, but resisted the temptation. There was no food as yet on the glittering golden plates, but small menus were lying in front of each of them. Harry picked his up uncertainly and looked around. There were no waiters. Dumbledore, however, looked carefully down at his own menu, then said very clearly to his plate, "Pork chops." And pork chops appeared. Getting the idea, the rest of the table placed their orders with their plates too. Harry glanced up at Hermione to see how she felt about this new and more complicated method of dining. Surely it meant plenty of extra work for the house elves. But for once, Hermione didn't seem to be thinking about SPEW. She was deep in talk with Victor Krum and hardly seemed to notice what she was eating. It now occurred to Harry that he had never actually heard Krum speak before, but he was certainly talking now, and very enthusiastically at that. Well, we have a castle also, not as big as this, nor as comfortable. I am thinking, he was telling Hermione. We have just 4 floors, and the fires are lit only for magical purposes, but we have grounds larger even than these. And in winter, we have very little daylight, so we are not enjoying them, but in summer we are flying every day over the lakes and the mountains. Now, Victor, said Karkaroff with a laugh that didn't reach his cold eyes. Don't go giving away anything else now, or your charming friend will know exactly where to find us. Dumbledore smiled, his eyes twinkling. Igor, all this secrecy. One would almost think you didn't want visitors. Well, Dumbledore, said Karkaroff, displaying his yellowing teeth to their fullest extent. We are all protective of our private domains, are we not? Do we not jealously guard the halls of learning that have been entrusted to us? Are we not right to be proud that we alone know our school's secrets, and right to protect them? Oh, I would never dream of assuming I know all of Hogwarts' secrets, Igor, said Dumbledore amicably. Only this morning, for instance, I took a wrong turn on the way up to the bathroom, and found myself in a beautifully proportioned room I had never seen before, containing a rather magnificent collection of chamber pots. When I went back to investigate more closely, I discovered that the room had vanished, but I must keep an eye out for it. Possibly it is only accessible at 5:30 in the morning, or it may only appear at the quarter moon, or when the seeker has an exceptionally full bladder. Harry snorted into his plate of goulash. Percy frowned, but Harry could have sworn that Dumbledore had given him a very small wink. Meanwhile, Fleur Delacour was criticizing the Hogwarts decorations to Roger Davies. This is nothing, she said dismissively, looking around at the sparkling walls of the great hall. At the Palace of Beauxbatons, we have ice sculptures all around the dining chamber at Christmas. They do not melt, of course. They are like huge statues of diamond, glittering around the place. And the food is simply superb. We have choirs of wood nymphs who serenade us as we eat. We have none of this ugly armor in the halls. And if a poltergeist ever entered into Beauxbatons, you would be expelled like that. She slapped her hand onto the table impatiently. Roger Davies was watching her talk with a very dazed look on his face, and he kept missing his mouth with his fork. Harry had the impression that Davies was too busy staring at Fleur to take in a word she was saying. Absolutely right, he said quickly, slapping his own hand down on the table in an imitation of Fleur. Like that, yeah. Harry looked around the hall. Hagrid was sitting at one of the other staff tables. He was back in his horrible hairy brown suit and gazing up at the top table. Harry saw him give a small wave, and looking around, saw Madame Maxime return it, her opals glittering in the candlelight. Hermione was now teaching Krum to say her name properly. He kept calling her Hermione. Hermione, she said slowly and clearly. Hermione. Close enough, she said, catching Harry's eye and grinning. When all of the food had been consumed, Dumbledore stood up and asked the students to do the same. Then, with a wave of his wand, all the tables zoomed back along the halls, leaving the floor clear, and then he conjured a raised platform into existence along the right wall. A set of drums, several guitars, a lute, a cello, and some bagpipes were upon it. The Weird Sisters now trooped up onto the stage to wildly enthusiastic applause. They were all extremely hairy and dressed in black robes that had been artfully ripped and torn. They picked up their instruments, and Harry, who had been so interested in watching them that he had almost forgotten what was coming, suddenly realized that the lanterns at all the other tables had gone out, and that the other champions and their partners were standing up. "Come on," Parvati hissed. "We're supposed to dance." Harry tripped over his dress robes as he stood up. The Weird Sisters struck a slow, mournful tune. Harry walked onto the brightly lit dance floor, carefully avoiding catching anyone's eye. He could see Dean and Seamus waving at him and sniggering. And next moment, Parvati had seized his hands, placed one hand around her waist, and was holding the other tightly in hers. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, Harry thought, revolving slowly on the spot. Parvati was steering. He kept his eyes fixed over the heads of the watching people, and very soon many of them too had come onto the dance floor, so that the champions were no longer the center of attention. Neville and Ginny were dancing nearby, He could see Ginny wincing frequently as Neville trod on her feet, and Dumbledore was waltzing with Madame Maxime. He was so dwarfed by her that the top of his pointed hat barely tickled her chin. However, she moved very gracefully for a woman so large. Mad-Eye Moody was doing an extremely ungainly two-step with Professor Sinistra, who was nervously avoiding his wooden leg. "Nice socks, Potter," Moody growled as he passed, his magical eyes staring through Harry's robes. "Oh, yeah, Dobby the house elf knitted them for me," said Harry, grinning. "He is so creepy," Parvati whispered as Moody clunked away. "I don't think that I should be allowed." Harry heard the final, quavering note from the bagpipe with relief. The weird sisters stopped playing. Applause filled the hall once more, and Harry let go of Parvati at once. "Let's sit down, shall we?" "Oh, but this is a really good one," Parvati said, as the weird sisters struck up a new song, which was much faster. "No, I don't like it," Harry lied, and he led her away from the dance floor, past Fred and Angelina, who were dancing so exuberantly that people around them were backing away in fear of injury, and over the table where Ron and Padma were sitting. "How's it going?" Harry asked Ron, sitting down and opening a bottle of butterbeer. Ron didn't answer. He was glaring at Hermione and Crumb, who were dancing nearby. Padma was sitting with her arms and legs crossed, one foot jiggling in time with the music. Every now and then, she threw a disgruntled look at Ron, who was completely ignoring her. Parvati sat down on Harry's other side and crossed her arms and legs too, and with minutes was asked to dance by a boy from Beauxbatons. "You don't mind, do you, Harry?" Parvati said. "What?" said Harry, who was now watching Cho and Cedric. "Oh, never mind," snapped Parvati, and she went off with the boy from Beauxbatons. When the song ended, she did not return. Hermione came over and sat down in Parvati's empty chair. She was a bit pink in the face from dancing. "Hi," said Harry. Ron didn't say anything. "It's hot, isn't it?" said Hermione, fanning herself with her hand. "Victor's just gone to get some drinks." Ron gave her a withering look. "Victor," he said. "Hasn't he asked you to call him Vicky yet?" Hermione looked at him in surprise. "What's up with you?" she said. "If you don't know," said Ron scathingly, "I'm not going to tell you." Hermione stared at him, then at Harry, who shrugged. "Ron, what?" "He's from Durmstrang," spat Ron. "He's competing against Harry, against Hogwarts. You're... Ron was obviously casting around for words strong enough to describe Hermione's crime. "Fraternizing with the enemy, that's what you're doing." Hermione's mouth fell open. "Don't be so stupid," she said after a moment. "The enemy, honestly. Who's the one who was all excited when they saw him arrive? Who's the one who wanted his autograph? Who's got a model of him up in their dormitory?" Ron chose to ignore this. "I suppose he asked you to come with him while you were both in the library?" "Yeah, he did," said Hermione, the pink patches on her cheeks glowing more brightly. "So what?" "What happened? Trying to get him to join Spew, were you?" "No, I wasn't. If you really want to know, then he said he'd been coming to the library every day to try and talk with me, but he hadn't been able to pluck up the courage." Hermione said this very quickly and blushed so deeply that she was the same color as Parvati's robes. "Yeah, well, that's his story," said Ron nastily. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "Obvious, isn't it? He's Karkaroff's student, isn't he? He knows who you hang around with. He's trying to get closer to Harry, get inside information on him, or get near enough to jinx him." Hermione looked as though Ron had slapped her. When she spoke, her voice quivered. "For your information, he hasn't asked me one single thing about Harry, not one." Ron changed tack at the speed of light. "Then he's hoping you'll help him find out what his egg means. I suppose you've been putting your heads together during those cozy little library sessions." "I'd never help him work out that egg," said Hermione, looking outraged. "Never. How could you say something like that? I want Harry to win the tournament. Harry knows that, don't you, Harry?" "You've got a funny way of showing it," sneered Ron. "This whole tournament's supposed to be about getting to know foreign wizards and making friends with them," said Hermione hotly. "No, it isn't," shouted Ron. "It's about winning." People were starting to stare at them. "Ron," said Harry quietly, "I haven't got a problem with Hermione coming with Crumb." But Ron ignored Harry too. "Why don't you go and find Vicky? He'll be wondering where you are," said Ron. "Don't call him Vicky." Hermione jumped to her feet and stormed off across the dance floor, disappearing into the crowd. Ron watched her go with a mixture of anger and satisfaction on his face. "Are you going to ask me to dance at all?" Padma asked him. "No," said Ron, still glaring after Hermione. "Fine," snapped Padma, and she got up and went to join Parvati and the Beauxbatons boy, who conjured up one of his friends to join them so fast that Harry could have sworn he had zoomed him there by a summoning charm. "There is Hermione," said a voice. Crumb had just arrived at their table, clutching 2 butterbeers. "No idea," said Ron mulishly, looking up at him. "Lost her, have you?" Crumb was looking surly again. "Well, if you see her, tell her I have drinks," he said, and he slouched off. "Made friends with Victor Crumb, have you, Ron?" Percy had bustled over, rubbing his hands together and looking extremely pompous. "Excellent! That's the whole point, you know. International magical cooperation." To Harry's displeasure, Percy now took Padma's vacated seat. The top table was now empty. Professor Dumbledore was dancing with Professor Sprout. Ludo Bagman with Professor McGonagall. Madame Maxime and Hagrid were cutting a path wide around the dance floor as they waltzed through the students, and Karkaroff was nowhere to be seen. When the next song ended, everyone applauded once more, and Harry saw Ludo Bagman kiss Professor McGonagall's hand and make his way back through the crowds, at which point Fred and George accosted him. "What did they think they're doing, annoying senior ministry members?" Percy hissed, watching Fred and George suspiciously. "No respect." Ludo Bagman shook off Fred and George fairly quickly, however, and spotting Harry, waved and came over to their table. "I hope my brothers weren't bothering you, Mr. Bagman," said Percy at once. "What? Oh, not at all, said Bagman. "No, they were just telling me a bit more about those fake wands of theirs, wondering whether I could advise them on the marketing. I've promised to put them in touch with a couple of contacts of mine at Zonko's joke shop." Percy didn't look happy about this at all, and Harry was prepared to bet that he would be rushing to tell Mrs. Weasley about this the moment he got home. Apparently Fred and George's plans had grown even more ambitious lately if they were hoping to sell to the public. Bagman opened his mouth to ask Harry something, but Percy diverted him. "How do you feel the tournament's going, Mr. Bagman?" "Our department's quite satisfied. The hitch with the Goblet of Fire," he glanced at Harry, "was a little unfortunate, of course, but it seems to have gone very smoothly since, don't you think?" "Oh, yes," Bagman said cheerfully. "It's all been enormous fun. How's old Barty doing? Shame he couldn't come." "Oh, I'm sure Mr. Crouch will be up and about in no time," said Percy importantly. "But in the meantime, I'm more than willing to take up the slack. Of course, it's not all attending balls," he laughed airily. "Oh, no. I've had to deal with all sorts of things that have cropped up in his absence. You heard Ali Bashir was caught smuggling a consignment of flying carpets into the country, and then we've had to persuade the Transylvanians to sign the international ban on dueling. I've got a meeting with their head of magical cooperation in the new year." "Let's go for a walk," Ron muttered to Harry. "Get away from Percy." Pretending they wanted more drinks, Harry and Ron left the table, edging around the dance floor, and slipped out into the entrance hall. The front doors stood open, and the fluttering fairy lights in the rose garden winked and twinkled as they went down the front steps, where they found themselves surrounded by bushes, winding ornamental paths, and large stone statues. Harry could hear splashing water, which sounded like a fountain. Here and there, people were sitting on carved benches. He and Harry set off along one of the winding paths through the rose bushes, but they had only gone a short way when they heard an unpleasantly familiar voice. "Don't see what there is to fuss about, Igor." "Severus, you cannot pretend this isn't happening." Karkaroff's voice sounded anxious and hushed, as though keen not to be overheard. "It's been getting clearer and clearer for months. I am becoming seriously concerned. I cannot deny it." "Then flee," said Snape's voice curtly. "Flee. I will make your excuses. I, however, am remaining at Hogwarts." Snape and Karkaroff came around the corner. Snape had his wand out and was blasting rose bushes apart, his expression most ill-natured. Squeals issued from many of the bushes, and dark shapes emerged from them. 10 points from Ravenclaw, Fawcett," Snape snarled as a girl ran past him. "And 10 points from Hufflepuff too, Stebbins," as a boy went rushing after her. "And what are you two doing?" he added, catching the sight of Harry and Ron on the path ahead. Karkaroff, Harry saw, looked slightly composed to see him standing there. His hand went nervously to his goatee, then he began winding it around his finger. "We're walking," Ron told Snape shortly. "Not against the law, is it?" "Keep walking then," Snape snarled, and he brushed past them, his long black cloak billowing out behind him. Karkaroff hurried away after Snape. Harry and Ron continued down the path. "What's got Karkaroff all worried?" Ron muttered. "And since when have he and Snape been on first-name terms?" said Harry slowly. They had reached a large stone reindeer now, over which they could see sparkling jets of a tall fountain. The shadowy outlines of two enormous people were visible on a stone bench, watching the water in the moonlight. And then Harry heard Hagrid speak. "Moment I saw ya, I knew," he was saying, in an oddly husky voice. Harry and Ron froze. This didn't sound like the sort of scene they ought to walk in on, somehow. Harry looked around, back up the path, and saw Fleur Delacour and Roger Davies standing half-concealed in a rose bush nearby. He tapped Ron on the shoulder and jerked his head toward them, meaning that they could easily sneak off that way without being noticed. Fleur and Davies looked very busy to Harry. But Ron, eyes widening in horror at the sight of Fleur, shook his head vigorously and pushed Harry deeper into the shadows behind the reindeer. "What did you know, Hagrid?" said Madame Maxime, a purr in her low voice. Harry definitely didn't want to listen to this. He knew Hagrid would hate to be overheard in a situation like this. He certainly would have. If it had been possible, he would have put his fingers in his ears and hummed loudly. But that really wasn't an option. Instead, he tried to interest himself in a beetle crawling along the stone reindeer's back, but the beetle just wasn't as interesting enough to block out Hagrid's next words. "I just knew you were like me. Was it your mother or your father?" I don't know what you mean, Hagrid." "It was my mother," said Hagrid quietly. "She was one of the last ones in Britain. Of course, I can't remember her too well. She left, see, when I was about 3. She wasn't really the maternal sort. Well, it's not in their natures, is it? Don't know what happened to her. Might be dead, for all I know." Madame Maxime didn't say anything, and Harry, in spite of himself, took his eyes off the beetle and looked over the top of the reindeer's antlers, listening. He had never heard Hagrid talk about his childhood before. "Me dad was broken-hearted when she went. Tiny little bloke, my dad was. By the time I was 6, I could lift him up and put him on top of the dresser if he annoyed me. Used to make him laugh." Hagrid's deep voice broke. Madame Maxime was listening, motionless, apparently staring at the silvery fountain. "Dad raised me, but he died, of course, just after I started school. Sorta had to make my own way after that. Dumbledore was a real help, mind. Very kind to me, he was." Hagrid pulled out a large spotted silk handkerchief and blew his nose heavily. "So, anyway, enough about me. What about you? What side you got it on?" But Madame Maxime had suddenly got to her feet. "It is chilly," she said, but whatever the weather was doing, it was nowhere near as cold as her voice. "I think I will go in now." "Eh?" said Hagrid blankly. "No, don't go. I've never met another one before." "Another what, precisely?" said Madame Maxime, her tone icy. Hagrid could have told Hagrid it was best not to answer. He stood there in the shadows, gritting his teeth, hoping against hope he wouldn't, but it was no good. "Another half-giant, o' course," said Hagrid. "How dare you!" shrieked Madame Maxime. Her voice exploded through the peaceful night, like a foghorn. Behind him, Harry heard Fleur and Roger fall out of their rosebush. "I have never been more insulted in my life. Half-giant? Moi? I have big bones." She stormed away. Great multicolored swarms of fairies rose into the air as she passed, angrily pushing aside bushes. Hagrid was still sitting on the bench, staring after her. It was much too dark to make out his expression. Then, after about a minute, he stood up and strode away, not back to the castle, but off onto the dark grounds in the direction of his cabin. "Come on," Harry said very quietly to Ron. "Let's go." But Ron didn't move. "What's up?" said Harry, looking at him. Ron looked around at Harry, his expression very serious indeed. Did you know, he whispered, about Hagrid being half giant? No, Harry said, shrugging. So what? He knew immediately from the look Ron was giving him that he was once again revealing his ignorance of the wizarding world. Brought up by the Dursleys, there were many things that wizards took for granted that were revelations to Harry, but these surprises had become fewer each successive year. Now, however, he could tell that most wizards would not have said, "So what?" upon finding out that one of their friends had a giantess for a mother. "I'll explain inside," said Ron quietly. "Come on." Fleur and Roger Davies had disappeared, probably into a more private clump of bushes. Harry and Ron returned to the Great Hall. Parvati and Padma were now sitting at a distant table with a whole crowd of Beauxbaton boys, and Hermione was once more dancing with Crumb. Harry and Ron sat down at a table far removed from the dance floor. "So," Harry prompted Ron, "what's the problem with giants?" "Well, they're... Ron struggled for words. "Not very nice," he finished lamely. "Who cares?" Harry said. "There's nothing wrong with Hagrid." "I know there isn't, but... Blimey, no wonder he keeps it quiet," said Ron, shaking his head. "I always thought he got in the way of a bad engorgement charm when he was a kid or something. Didn't like to mention it." "But what's it matter if his mother was a giantess?" said Harry. "Well, no one who knows him will care, because they'll know he's not dangerous," said Ron slowly. "But, Harry, they're just vicious giants. It's like Hagrid said, it's in their natures. They're like trolls. They just like killing. Everyone knows that. There aren't any left in Britain now, though." "What happened to them?" "Well, they were dying out anyway, and then loads of them got themselves killed by Aurors. There's supposed to be giants abroad, though. They hide out in the mountains, mostly." I don't know who Maxime thinks she's kidding," Harry said, watching Madame Maxime sitting alone at the judges' table, looking very somber. "If Hagrid's half-giant, she definitely is. Big bones. The only thing that's got bigger bones than her is a dinosaur." Harry and Ron spent the rest of the ball discussing giants in the corner, neither of them having any inclination to dance. Harry tried not to watch Cho and Cedric too much. It gave him a very strong desire to kick something. When the Weird Sisters finished playing at midnight, everyone gave them a last loud round of applause and started to wend their way into the entrance hall. Many people were expressing the wish that the ball could have gone on longer, but Harry was perfectly happy to be going to bed. As far as he was concerned, the evening hadn't been much fun. Out in the entrance hall, Harry and Ron saw Hermione saying goodnight to Crumb before he went back to the Durmstrang ship. She gave Ron a very cold look and swept past him up the marble staircase without speaking. Harry and Ron followed her, but halfway up the staircase, Harry heard someone calling him. "Hey, Harry!" It was Cedric Diggory. Harry could see Cho waiting for him in the entrance hall below. "Yeah?" said Harry coldly as Cedric ran up the... I thought it was Colin Creevy, so I used a high voice. Sorry about that. "Hey, Harry!" It was Cedric Diggory. Harry could see Cho waiting for him in the entrance hall below. "Yeah?" said Harry coldly as Cedric ran up the stairs toward him. Cedric looked as though he didn't want to say whatever it was in front of Ron, who shrugged, looking bad-tempered, and continued to climb the stairs. "Listen," Cedric lowered his voice as Ron disappeared. "I owe you one for telling me about the dragons. You know that golden egg? Does yours wail when you open it?" "Yeah," said Harry. "Well, take a bath, okay?" "What?" "Take a bath, and take the egg with you, and just mull things over in the hot water. It'll help you think. Trust me." Harry stared at him. "Tell you what, use the prefect's bathroom. Fourth door to the left of that statue of Boris the Bewildered on the 5th floor. Password's Pine Fresh. Gotta go. Want to say goodnight." He grinned at Harry again and hurried back down the stairs to Cho. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower alone. That had been extremely strange advice. Why would a bath help him work out what the wailing egg meant? Was Cedric pulling his leg? Was he trying to make Harry look like a fool so Cho would like him even more by comparison? The fat lady and her friend V were snoozing in the picture over the portrait hole. Harry had to yell "fairy lights" before he woke them up, and when he did, they were extremely irritated. He climbed into the common room and found Ron and Hermione having a blazing row. Standing 10 feet apart, they were bellowing at each other, each scarlet in the face. Well, if you don't like it, you know what the solution is, don't you? Yelled Hermione, her hair coming down out of its elegant bun now, and her face was screwed up in anger. Oh yeah? Ron yelled back. What's that? Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort. Ron mouthed soundlessly like a goldfish out of water as Hermione turned on her heel and stormed up the girls' staircase to bed. Ron turned to look at Harry. Well, he spluttered, looking thunderstruck. Well, that just proves... completely missed the point. Harry didn't say anything. He liked being back on speaking terms with Ron too much to speak his mind right now, but he somehow thought that Hermione had gotten the point much better than Ron had. End of chapter 23. Oh, that was a long one. And that was the Yule Ball chapter. That's a pretty memorable chapter, I think. Oof. That was a lot of words. Oof. Are we halfway through the book yet? Yeah, we are. We are more than halfway through now. Oof. I'm also sweating in here a little bit. So, Hermione going with Crom and like looking nice and also having her teeth smaller and everything and her hair all dressed up and everything. That's a really memorable point. And Fleur and Roger Davies in the bushes is probably the horniest moment of the entire series, probably. And yeah. The half-giant plot line getting revealed. Reading is hard work. It is a little bit. How long have we been doing this? We're a bit under 2 hours. I should do another chapter. But let me take a little break, because that was like a lot. Yeah, I was doing some smooth reading there. That was pretty good. Okay, let's see. Oh, I missed a lot of stuff here. The Yule Ball is your favorite part. It's pretty good. I think it's a good chapter. And the lead up to it, I think, is okay. Goblet of Fire is your favorite. It's not my favorite. I like Half-Blood Prince the most, I think. I need to reread them all, though. It's been, like, more than 10 years. Yeah, Dobby is kind of stressful, I think. Gender. This is probably relating to Ron's dress robes, right? Oh, I don't know which part you're referring to here. Hermione's supposed to look suddenly stunning for the first time, but in the movie she looks the same as she always does. Oh. I'm not familiar with the movie, so I can't really comment on it. I definitely like the books more, so... A secret book. Well, I don't know what you mean. I still have Cursed Child here as the 8th book, so that's the most secret book I have. Yeah. Alright, yeah, give me a moment. I'm gonna have more water. Stand up. Yeah. So what's the next chapter? It's Rita Skeeter's Scoop. Okay, I think I know what this is about. And as usual, there are certain hints in the story along the way. Like, I think a lot of these books, she drops hints along the way about certain things and doesn't reveal it till later. And one of the hints was just dropped in that chapter about something. I'm not going to spoil it, but like little details that seem like just description, like extra description, but actually are like a clue for something else. Subtle, too subtle to like solve it, but like it's interesting, I guess. Sure, yeah. Foreshadowing. I'm not like a narrative expert or whatnot, so I ate a lot of food before I started this stream, so let me just stand up for a minute. Yeah, food's one of the good fucking things about being alive, I think. It's just really nice to have a nice meal. Alright. Chapter 24, Rita Skeeter's Scoop. Everybody got up late on Boxing Day. The Gryffindor common room was much quieter than it had been lately. Many yawns punctuated the lazy conversations. Hermione's hair was bushy again. She confessed to Harry that she had used liberal amounts of Sleek Easy's hair potion on it for the ball. But it's way too much bother to do it every day, she said matter-of-factly, scratching a purring Crookshanks behind the ears. Oh, actually, one second, let me do something. I just want to reboot this thing so it doesn't crash later. I forgot to do that. Alright. Ron and Hermione seemed to have reached an unspoken agreement not to discuss their argument. They were being quite friendly to each other, though oddly formal. Ron and Harry wasted no time in telling Hermione about the conversation they had overheard between Madame Maxime and Hagrid, but Hermione didn't seem to find the news that Hagrid was a half-giant nearly as shocking as Ron did. "Well, I thought he must be," she said, shrugging. "I knew he couldn't be pure giant, because they're about 20 feet tall. But honestly, all this hysteria about giants, they can't all be horrible. It's the same sort of prejudice that people have toward werewolves. It's just bigotry, isn't it?" Ron looked as though he would have liked to reply scathingly, but perhaps he didn't want another row, because he contented himself with shaking his head disbelievingly while Hermione wasn't looking. It was time now to think of the homework they had neglected during the first week of holidays. Everyone seemed to be feeling rather flat now that Christmas was over, everybody except Harry, that is, who was starting, once again, to feel slightly nervous. The trouble was that February the 24th looked a lot closer from this side of Christmas, and he still hadn't done anything about working out the clue inside the golden egg. He therefore started taking the egg out of his trunk every time he went up to the dormitory, opening it and listening intently, hoping that this time it would make some sense. He strained to think what the sound reminded him of, apart from 30 musical saws, but he had never heard anything like it. He closed the egg, shook it vigorously, and opened it again to see if the sound had changed, but it hadn't. He tried asking the egg questions, shouting over all the wailing, but nothing happened. He even threw the egg across the room, though he hadn't really expected that to help. Harry had not forgotten the hint that Cedric had given him, but his less than friendly feelings towards Cedric just now meant that he was not keen to take his help if he could avoid it. In any case, it seemed to him that if Cedric had really wanted to give Harry a hand, he would have been a lot more explicit. Harry, had told Cedric exactly what was coming in the first task. And Cedric's idea of a fair exchange had been to tell Harry to take a bath. Well, he didn't need that sort of rubbishy help. Not from someone who kept walking down corridors hand in hand with Cho, anyway. And so, the first day of the new term arrived, and Harry set off to lessons, weighed down with books, parchment, and quills as usual, but also with the lurking worry of the egg heavy in his stomach, as though he were carrying that around with him too. Snow was thick upon the grounds, and the greenhouse windows were covered in condensation so thick that they couldn't see out of them in herbology. No one was looking forward to care magical creatures much in this weather, though as Ron said, the Scroots would probably warm them up nicely, either by chasing them or blasting off so forcefully that Hagrid's cabin would catch fire. When they arrived at Hagrid's cabin, however, they found an elderly witch with a closely cropped gray hair and very prominent chin standing before his front door. "Hurry up now, the bell rang 5 minutes ago," she barked at them as they struggled toward her through the window. "Who are you?" said Ron, staring at her. "Where's Hagrid?" "My name is Professor Grubbly Plank," she said briskly. "I am your temporary care of magical creatures teacher." "Where's Hagrid?" Harry repeated loudly. "He is indisposed," said Professor Grubbly Plank shortly. Soft and unpleasant anger reached Harry's ears. He turned. Draco Malfoy and the rest of the Slytherins were joining the class. All of them looked gleeful, and none of them looked surprised to see Professor Grubbly Plank. "This way, please," said Professor Grubbly Plank, and she strode off around the paddock where the Beaubaton horses were shivering. Harry, Ron, and Hermione followed her, looking back over their shoulders at Hagrid's cabin. All the windows were closed. Was Hagrid in there, alone and ill? "What's wrong with Hagrid?" Harry said, hurrying to catch up with Professor Grubbly Plank. "Never you mind," she said, as though she thought he was being nosy. "I do mind, though," said Harry hotly. "What's up with him?" Professor Grubbly Plank acted as though she couldn't hear him. She led them past a paddock where the huge Beaubaton horses were standing, huddled against the cold, and toward a tree on the edge of the forest, where a large and beautiful unicorn was tethered. Many of the girls oohed at the sight of the unicorn. "Oh, it's so beautiful," whispered Lavender Brown. "How did she get it? They're supposed to be really hard to catch." The unicorn was so brightly white it made the snow all around look gray. It was pawing the ground nervously with its golden hooves and throwing back its horned head. "Boys, keep back," barked Professor Grubbly Plank, throwing out an arm and catching Harry hard in the chest. "They prefer the woman's touch, unicorns. Girls to the front, and approach with care. Come on, easy does it." She and the girls walked slowly forward toward the unicorn, leaving the boys standing near the paddock fence, watching. The moment Professor Grubbly Plank was out of earshot, Harry turned to Ron. "What do you reckon's wrong with him? You don't think a Scroot—" "Oh, he hasn't been attacked, Potter, if that's what you're thinking," said Malfoy softly. "No, he's just too ashamed to show his big, ugly face." "What do you mean?" said Harry sharply. Malfoy put his hand inside his pocket of his robes and pulled out a folded page of newsprint. "There you go," he said. "Hate to break it to you, Potter." He smirked as Harry snatched the page, unfolded it, and read it, with Ron, Seamus, Dean, and Neville looking over his shoulder. It was an article topped with a picture of Hagrid looking extremely shifty. Dumbledore's giant mistake. Albus Dumbledore, eccentric headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, has never been afraid to make controversial staff appointments, writes Rita Skeeter, special correspondent. In September of this year, he hired Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, the notoriously jinx-happy ex-Auror, to teach Defense Against the Dark Arts, a decision that caused many raised eyebrows at the Ministry of Magic, given Moody's well-known habit of attacking anybody who makes a sudden movement in his presence. Mad-Eye Moody, however, looks responsible and kindly when set beside the part-human Dumbledore employs to teach care of magical creatures. Rubeus Hagrid, who admits to being expelled from Hogwarts in his third year, has enjoyed the position of gamekeeper at the school ever since, a job secured for him by Dumbledore. Last year, however, Hagrid used his mysterious influence over the headmaster to secure the additional post of Care of Magical Creatures teacher over the heads of many better qualified candidates. An alarmingly large and ferocious-looking man, Hagrid has been using his newfound authority to terrify the students in his care with a succession of horrific creatures. While Dumbledore turns a blind eye, Hagrid has maimed several pupils during a series of lessons that many admit to being very frightening. I was attacked by a hippogriff, and my friend Vincent Crabbe got a bad bite off a flobberworm, says Draco Malfoy, a fourth-year student. We all hate Hagrid. We're all just too scared to say anything. Hagrid has no intention of ceasing his campaign of intimidation, however. In conversation with the Daily Prophet reporter last month, he admitted breeding creatures he has dubbed blast-ended scroots, highly dangerous crosses between manticores and fire crabs. The creation of new breeds of magical creature is, of course, an activity usually closely observed by the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Hagrid, however, considers himself to be above such petty restrictions. I was just having some fun, he says, before hastily changing the subject. As if this were not enough, the Daily Prophet has now unearthed evidence that Hagrid is not, as he has always pretended, a pure-blood wizard. He is not, in fact, even pure human. His mother, we can exclusively reveal, is none other than the giantess Fridwulfa, whose whereabouts are currently unknown. Bloodthirsty and brutal, the giants brought themselves to the point of extinction by warring amongst themselves during the last century. The handful that remained joined the ranks of He Who Must Not Be Named and were responsible for some of the worst Mogul killings of his reign of terror. While many of the giants who served He Who Must Not Be Named were killed by Aurors working against the dark side, Fridwulfa was not among them. It is possible she escaped to one of the giant communities still existing in foreign mountain ranges. If his antics during Care of Magical Creatures lessons are any guide, however, Fridwulfa's son appears to have inherited her brutal nature. In a bizarre twist, Hagrid is reputed to have developed a close friendship with a boy who brought around You-Know-Who's fall from power, thereby driving Hagrid's own mother, like the rest of You-Know-Who's supporters, into hiding. Perhaps Harry Potter is unaware of the unpleasant truth about his large friend, but Albus Dumbledore surely has a duty to ensure that Harry Potter, along with his fellow students, is warned about the dangers of associating with part giants. Harry finished reading and looked up at Ron, whose mouth was hanging open. "How did she find out?" he whispered. But that wasn't what was bothering Harry. "What do you mean we all hate Hagrid?" Harry spat at Malfoy. "What's this rubbish about him?" He pointed at Crabbe. "Getting a bad bite off a flobberworm. They haven't even got teeth." Crabbe was sniggering, apparently very pleased with himself. "Well, I think this should put an end to the oaf's teaching career," said Malfoy, his eyes glinting. "Half giant. And there was me thinking he just swallowed a bottle of Skelegro when he was young. None of the mummies and daddies are going to like this at all. They'll be worried he'll eat their kids. Haha. Are you paying attention over there?" Professor Grubbly Plank's voice carried over to the boys. The girls were all clustered around the unicorn now, stroking it. Harry was so angry that the Daily Prophet article shook in his hands as he turned to stare unseeingly at the unicorn, whose many magical properties Professor Grubbly Plank was now enumerating in a loud voice, so that the boys could hear too. "I hope she stays, that woman," says Parvati Patil, when the lesson had ended, and they were all heading back to the castle for lunch. "That's more what I thought Care of Magical Creatures would be like. Proper creatures, like unicorns, not monsters." "What about Hagrid?" Harry said angrily as they went up the steps. "What about him?" said Parvati in a hard voice. "He can still be gamekeeper, can't he?" Parvati had been very cool toward Harry since the ball. He supposed that he ought to have paid her a bit more attention, but she seemed to have a good time all the same. She was certainly telling anyone who would listen that she had made arrangements to meet the boy from Beauxbatons in Hogsmeade on the next weekend trip. "That was a really good lesson," said Hermione as they entered the great hall. "I didn't know half the things Professor Grubbly Plank told us about unit." "Look at this," Harry snarled, and he shoved the Daily Prophet article under Hermione's nose. Hermione's mouth fell open as she read. Her reaction was exactly the same as Ron's. "How did that horrible Skeeter woman find out? You don't think Hagrid told her?" "No," said Harry, leading the way over the Gryffindor table and throwing himself into a chair, furious. "He never even told us, did he? I reckon she was so mad he wouldn't give her loads of horrible stuff about me. She went ferreting around to get him back. Maybe she heard him telling Madame Maxine at the ball, said Hermione quietly. We'd have seen her in the garden, said Ron. Anyway, she's not supposed to come to the school anymore. Hagrid said Dumbledore banned her. Maybe she's got an invisibility cloak, said Harry, ladling chicken casserole onto his plate and splashing it everywhere in his anger. Sort of the thing she'd do, isn't it? Hiding in bushes, listening to people. Like you and Ron did, you mean, said Hermione. We weren't trying to hear him, said Ron indignantly. We didn't have any choice. The stupid prat, talking about his giantess mother where anyone could have heard him. We've got to go and see him, said Harry. This evening, after divination. Tell him we want him back. You do want him back, he shouted at Hermione. Well, I'm not going to pretend it didn't make a nice change, having a proper Care of Magical Creatures lesson for once. But I do want Hagrid back, of course I do, Hermione added hastily, quailing under Harry's furious stare. So that evening, after dinner, the three of them left the castle once more and went down to the frozen grounds to Hagrid's cabin. They knocked, and Fang's booming barks answered. Hagrid, it's us, Harry shouted, pounding on the door. Open up. Hagrid didn't answer. They could hear Fang scratching at the door, whining, but it didn't open. They hammered on it for 10 more minutes. Ron even went and banged on one of the windows, but there was no response. What's he avoiding us for? Hermione said when they had finally given up and were walking back to the school. He surely doesn't think we'd care about him being half giant. But it seemed that Hagrid did care. They didn't see a sign of him all week. He didn't appear at the staff table at mealtimes. They didn't see him going about his gamekeeper duties on the grounds. And Professor Grubblyplank continued to take the Care of Magical Creatures classes. Malfoy was gloating at every possible opportunity. Missing your half-breed pal, he kept whispering to Harry whenever there was a teacher around so that he was safe from Harry's retaliation. Missing the Elephant Man. There was a Hogsmeade visit through January. Hermione was very surprised that Harry was going to go. I just thought you'd want to take advantage of the common room being quiet, she said. Really get to work on that egg. Oh, I reckon I've got a pretty good idea what it's about now, Harry lied. Have you really? Said Hermione, looking impressed. Well done. Harry's insides gave a guilty squirm, but he ignored them. He still had 5 weeks to work out the egg clue, after all. And that was ages, whereas if he went to Hogsmeade, he might run into Hagrid and get a chance to persuade him to come back. He, Ron, and Hermione left the castle together on Saturday and set off through the cold, wet grounds towards the gates. As they passed the Durmstrang ship moored in the lake, they saw Victor Krum emerge onto the deck, dressed in nothing but swimming trunks. He was very skinny indeed, but apparently a lot tougher than he looked because he climbed onto the side of the ship, stretched out his arms, and dived right into the lake. He's mad, said Harry, staring at Krum's dark head as it bobbed out in the middle of the lake. It must be freezing. It's January. It's a lot colder where he comes from, said Hermione. I suppose it feels quite warm to him. Yeah, but there's still the giant squid, said Ron. He didn't sound anxious. If anything, he sounded hopeful. Hermione noticed the tone of voice and frowned. He's really nice, you know, she said. He's not at all like you'd think, coming from Durmstrang. He likes it much better here, he told me. Ron said nothing. He hadn't mentioned Victor Krum since the ball, but Harry found a miniature arm under his bed on Boxing Day, which had looked very much like it had been snapped off a small model figure wearing a Bulgarian Quidditch robes. Harry kept his eyes skinned for a sign of Hagrid all the way down slushy High Street, and suggested a visit to the Three Broomsticks once he had ascertained that Hagrid was not in any of the shops. The pub was as crowded as ever, but one look around, all the tables told Harry that Hagrid wasn't there. Heart sinking, he went back up to the bar with Ron and Hermione, ordered 3 butterbeers from Madame Rosmerta, and thought gloomily that he might just as well have stayed behind and listened to the egg wailing after all. Doesn't he ever go into the office? Hermione whispered suddenly. Look. She pointed into the mirror behind the bar, and Harry saw Ludo Bagman reflected there, sitting in a shadowy corner with a bunch of goblins. Bagman was talking very fast in a low voice to the goblins, all of whom had their arms crossed and were looking rather menacing. It was indeed odd, Harry thought, that Bagman was here at the Three Broomsticks on a weekend where there was no Triwizard event, and therefore no judging to be done. He watched Bagman in the mirror. He was looking strained again, quite as strained as he had the night in the forest before the dark mark had appeared. But just then Bagman glanced over the bar, saw Harry, and stood up. In a moment, Harry heard him say brusquely to the goblins, and Bagman hurried through the pub toward Harry, his boyish grin back in place. Harry, he said, how are you? Been hoping to run into you. Everything going all right? Fine, thanks, said Harry. Wonder if I could have a quick private word, Harry, said Bagman eagerly. You couldn't give us a moment, you two, could you? Okay, said Ron, and he and Hermione went off to find a table. Bagman led Harry along the bar to the end furthest from Madame Rosmerta. Well, I just thought I'd congratulate you again on your splendid performance against that horntail, Harry, said Bagman. Really superb. Thanks, said Harry, but he knew this couldn't be all Bagman wanted to say, because he could have congratulated Harry in front of Ron and Hermione. Bagman didn't seem in any particular rush to spill the beans, though. Harry saw him glance into the mirror over the bar at the goblins, who were all watching him and Harry in silence through their dark, slanting eyes. Absolute nightmare, said Bagman to Harry in an undertone, noticing Harry watching the goblins, too. Their English isn't too good. It's like being back with the Bulgarians at the Quidditch World Cup, but at least they use sign language another human could recognize. This lot keep gabbling in gobbledygook, and I only know one word of gobbledygook, bladvac. It means pickaxe, and I don't like to use it in case they think I'm threatening them. He gave a short, booming laugh. What do they want? Harry said, noticing how the goblins were still watching Bagman very closely. Well, said Bagman, suddenly looking nervous. They're looking for Barty Crouch. Why are they looking for him here? Said Harry. He's at the Ministry in London, isn't he? As a matter of fact, I have no idea where he is, said Bagman. He's sort of stopped coming to work, been absent for a couple weeks now. Young Percy, his assistant, says he's ill. Apparently he's just been sending instructions in by owl. But would you mind not mentioning that to anyone, Harry? Because Rita Skeeter is still poking around everywhere she can, and I'm willing to bet she'd work up Barty's illness into something sinister. Probably say he's gone missing like Bertha Jorkins. Have you heard anything about Bertha Jorkins? Harry asked. No, said Bagman, looking strained again. I've got people looking, of course. About time, thought Harry. And it's all very strange. She's definitely arrived in Albania because she met her second cousin there, and then she left the cousin's house to go south and see an aunt, and she seemed to have vanished without a trace en route. Blowed if I can see where she's gone to. She doesn't seem the type to elope, for instance, but still. What are we doing? Talking about goblins and Bertha Jorkins. I really want to ask you, he lowered his voice. How are you getting on with your golden egg? Not bad, Harry said untruthfully. Bagman seemed to know he wasn't being honest. Listen, Harry, he said, still in a very low voice. I feel very bad about all this. You were thrown into this tournament. You didn't volunteer for it. And if... His voice was so quiet now, Harry had to lean closer to listen. If I can help at all, a prod in the right direction. I've taken a liking to you, the way you got past that dragon. Well, just say the word. Harry stared up into Bagman's round, rosy face and his wide, baby blue eyes. We're supposed to work out the clues alone, aren't we? He said, careful to keep his voice casual and not sound as though he was accusing the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports of breaking the rules. Well, yes, said Bagman impatiently. But come on, Harry, we all want a Hogwarts victory, don't we? Have you offered Cedric help? Harry said. The smallest of frowns creased Bagman's smooth face. No, I haven't, he said. Well, like I say, I've taken a liking to you. Just thought I'd offer. Well, thanks, said Harry, but I think I'm nearly there with the egg. A couple more days should crack it. He wasn't entirely sure why he was refusing Bagman's help, except that Bagman was almost a stranger to him, and accepting his assistance would somehow feel much more like cheating than asking advice from Ron, Hermione, or Sirius. Bagman looked almost affronted, but couldn't say much more as Fred and George turned up that moment. Hello, Mr. Bagman, said Fred brightly. Can we buy you a drink? No, said Bagman, with a last disappointed glance at Harry. No, thank you, boys. Fred and George looked quite as disappointed as Bagman, who was surveying Harry as though he had let him down badly. "Well, I must dash," he said. "Nice seeing you all. Good luck, Harry." He hurried out of the pub. The goblins all slid off their chairs and exited after him. Harry went to rejoin Ron and Hermione. "What did he want?" Ron said the moment Harry had sat down. "He offered to help me with the golden egg," said Harry. "He shouldn't be doing that," said Hermione, looking very shocked. "He's one of the judges. And anyway, you've already worked it out, haven't you?" Nearly," said Harry. "Well, I don't think Dumbledore would like it if he knew Bagman was trying to persuade you to cheat," said Hermione, still looking deeply disapproving. "I hope he's trying to help Cedric as much." "He's not, I asked," said Harry. "Who cares if Diggory's getting help?" said Ron. Harry privately agreed. "Those goblins didn't look very friendly," said Hermione, sipping her butterbeer. "What were they doing here?" "Looking for Crouch, according to Bagman," said Harry. "He's still ill, hasn't gone into work." "Maybe Percy's poisoning him," said Ron. "Probably thinks if Crouch snuffs it, he'll be made the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation." Hermione gave Ron a "don't joke about things like that" look, and said, "Funny, goblins looking for Mr. Crouch. They normally deal with the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures." "Crouch can speak loads of different languages, though," said Harry. "Maybe they need an interpreter." "Worrying about poor ickle goblins now, are you?" Ron asked Hermione. "Thinking of starting up SPUG or something, Society for the Protection of Ugly Goblins." "Ha ha ha," said Hermione sarcastically. "Goblins don't need protection. Haven't you been listening to what Professor Binns has been telling us about goblin rebellions?" "No," said Harry and Ron together. "Well, they're quite capable of dealing with wizards," said Hermione, taking another sip of butterbeer. "They're very clever. They're not like house elves who never stick up for themselves." "Uh-oh," said Ron, staring at the door. Rita Skeeter had just entered. She was wearing banana yellow robes today. Her long nails were painted shocking pink, and she was accompanied by her paunchy photographer. She bought drinks, and she and the photographer made their way through the crowds to the table nearby. Harry, Ron, and Hermione glaring at her as she approached. She was talking fast and looking very satisfied about something. "Didn't seem very keen to talk to us, did he, bozo? Now why would that be, do you think? And what's he doing with a pack of goblins in tow anyway? Showing them the sights? What nonsense. He was always a bad liar. Reckon something's up. Think we could do a bit of digging. Disgraced ex-head of magical games and sports, Ludo Bagman. Snappy start to his sentence, bozo. We just need to find a story to fit it." "Trying to ruin someone else's life," said Harry loudly. A few people looked around. Rita Skeeter's eyes widened behind her jeweled spectacles as she saw who had spoken. "Harry," she said, beaming. "How lovely. Why don't you come and join—" "I wouldn't come near you with a 10-foot broomstick," said Harry furiously. "What did you do that for Hagrid for, eh?" Rita Skeeter raised her heavily penciled eyebrows. "Our readers have a right to the truth, Harry. I'm merely doing my—" "Who cares if he's a half-giant?" Harry shouted. "There's nothing wrong with him." The whole pub had gone very quiet. Madame Rosmerta was staring over from behind the bar, apparently oblivious to the fact that the flagon she was filling with mead was overflowing. Rita Skeeter's smile flickered very slightly, but she hitched it back almost at once. She snapped open her crocodile-skin handbag, pulled out her quick quotes quill, and said, "How about giving me an interview about the Hagrid you know, Harry, the man behind the muscles, your unlikely friendship and the reasons behind it? Would you call him a father substitute?" Hermione stood up very abruptly, her butterbeer clutched in her hand as though it were a grenade. "You horrible woman," she said through gritted teeth. "You don't care, do you? Anything for a story, and anyone will do, won't they? Even Ludo Bagman." "Sit down, you silly little girl, and don't talk about things you don't understand," said Rita Skeeter coldly, her eyes hardening as they fell on Hermione. "I know things about Ludo Bagman that would make your hair curl. Not that it needs it," she added, eyeing Hermione's bushy hair. "Let's go," said Hermione. "Come on, Harry, Ron." They left. Many people were staring at them as they went. Harry glanced back as they reached the door. Rita Skeeter's quick quotes quill was out. It was zooming backward and forward over a piece of parchment on the table. "She'll be after you next, Hermione," said Ron in a low and worried voice as they walked quietly back up the street. "Let her try," said Hermione defiantly. She was shaking with rage. "I'll show her. Silly little girl, am I? Oh, I'll get her back for this. First Harry, then Hagrid. You don't want to go upsetting Rita Skeeter, said Ron nervously. I'm serious, Hermione. She'll dig up something on you. My parents don't read the Daily Prophet. She can't scare me into hiding, said Hermione, now striding along so fast that it was all Harry and Ron could do to keep up with her. The last time Harry had seen Hermione in a rage like this, she had hit Draco Malfoy around the face. And Hagrid isn't hiding anymore. He should never have let that excuse for a human being upset him. Come on. Breaking into a run, she led them all the way back up the road, through the gates flanked by winged boars, and up through the grounds to Hagrid's cabin. The curtains were still drawn, and they could hear Fang barking as they approached. Hagrid, Hermione shouted, pounding on his front door. Hagrid, that's enough. We know you're in there. Nobody cares if your mom was a giantess, Hagrid. You can't let that foul Skeeter woman do this to you. Hagrid, get out here. You're just being... The door opened. Hermione said, about... and then stopped very suddenly, because she had found herself face to face not with Hagrid, but with Albus Dumbledore. Good afternoon, he said pleasantly, smiling down at them. We wanted to see Hagrid, said Hermione in a rather small voice. Yes, I surmised as much, said Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling. Why don't you come in? Oh, okay, said Hermione. She, Ron, and Harry went into the cabin. Fang launched himself upon Harry the moment he entered, barking madly and trying to lick his ears. Harry fended off Fang and looked around. Hagrid was sitting at his table, where there were 2 large mugs of tea. He looked a real mess. His face was blotchy, his eyes swollen, and he had gone to the other extreme where his hair was concerned. Far from trying to make it behave, it now looked like a wig of tangled wire. Hi, Hagrid, said Harry. Hagrid looked up. Lo, he said in a very hoarse voice. More tea, I think, said Dumbledore, closing the door behind Harry, Ron, and Hermione, drawing out his wand and twiddling it. A revolving tea tray appeared in midair along with a plate of cakes. Dumbledore magicked the tray onto the table, and everyone sat down. There was a slight pause, and then Dumbledore said, Did you by any chance hear what Miss Granger was shouting, Hagrid? Hermione went slightly pink, but Dumbledore smiled at her and continued. Hermione, Harry, and Ron still seem to want to know you, judging by the way they were attempting to break down the door. Of course we still want to know you, Harry said, staring at Hagrid. You don't think anything that Skeeter cow... Sorry, Professor, he added quickly, looking up at Dumbledore. I have gone temporarily deaf and haven't any idea what you say, Harry, said Dumbledore, twiddling his thumbs and staring at the ceiling. Right, said Harry sheepishly. I just meant, Hagrid, how could you think we'd care what that woman wrote about you? 2 fat tears leaked out of Hagrid's beetle-black eyes and fell slowly into his tangled beard. Living proof of what I've been telling you, Hagrid, said Dumbledore, still looking carefully up at the ceiling. I have shown you the letters from the countless parents who remember you from their own days here, telling me in no uncertain terms that if I sacked you, they would have something to say about it. Not all of them, said Hagrid hoarsely. Not all of them want me to stay. Really, Hagrid, if you are holding out for universal popularity, I'm afraid you will be in this cabin for a very long time, said Dumbledore, now peering sternly over his half-moon spectacles. Not a week has passed since I became headmaster of the school when I haven't had at least one owl complaining about the way I run it. But what should I do? Barricade myself in my study and refuse to talk to anybody? Yeah, you're not half giant, said Hagrid croakily. Hagrid, look what I've got for relatives, Harry said furiously. Look at the Dursleys. An excellent point, said Professor Dumbledore. My own brother, Aberforth, was prosecuted for practicing inappropriate charms on a goat. It was all over the papers. But did Aberforth hide? No, he did not. He held his head high and went about his business as usual. Of course, I'm not entirely sure he can read, so that may not have been bravery. Come back and teach, Hagrid, said Hermione quietly. Please come back. We really miss you. Hagrid gulped. More tears leaked down his cheek and into his tangled beard. Dumbledore stood up. I refuse to accept your resignation, Hagrid, and I expect you back at work on Monday, he said. You will join me for breakfast at 8:30 in the Great Hall. No excuses. Good afternoon to you all. Dumbledore left the cabin, pausing only to scratch Fang's ears. When the door had shut behind him, Hagrid had begun to sob into his dustbin lid-sized hands. Hermione kept patting his arm, and at last Hagrid looked up, his eyes very red indeed, and said, "Great man, Dumbledore, great man." "Yeah, he is," said Ron. "Can I have one of those cakes, Hagrid?" "Help yourself," said Hagrid, wiping his eyes on the back of his hand. He's right, of course. You're all right. I've been stupid. My old dad would have been ashamed of the way I'd been behaving." More tears leaked out, but he wiped them away more forcefully and said, "Never shown you a picture of my old dad, have I? Here." Hagrid got up, went over to his dresser, opened a drawer, and pulled out a picture of a short wizard with Hagrid's crinkled black eyes, beaming as he sat on top of Hagrid's shoulder. Hagrid was a good 7 or 8 feet tall, judging by the apple tree beside him, but his face was beardless, young, round, and smooth. He looked hardly older than 11. "That was just taken after I got into Hogwarts," Hagrid croaked. "Dad was dead chuffed. Thought I might not be a wizard, see, 'cause me mom. Well, anyway, course, I never was great shakes at magic, really, but at least he never saw me expelled. Died, see, in my 2nd year. Dumbledore was the one who stuck up for me after Dad went. Got me the gamekeeper job. Trusts people, he does. Gives them second chances. That's what sets him apart from other heads, see? He'll accept anyone at Hogwarts, as long as they've got the talent. Knows people can turn out okay even if their families weren't. Well, all that respectable. Well, but some don't understand that. There's some who'll always hold it against you. There's some who'd even pretend they just had big bones rather than stand up and say, "I am what I am. I am not ashamed." Never be ashamed, my old dad used to say. There's some who'll hold it against you, but they're not worth bothering with. And he was right. I've been an idiot. I'm not bothering with her no more, I promise you that. Big bones. I'll give her big bones. Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked at one another nervously. Harry would rather have taken 50 blast-ended Scroots for a walk than admit to Hagrid that he had overheard him talking to Madame Maxime. But Hagrid was still talking, apparently unaware that he had said anything odd. "You know what, Harry," he said, looking up from the photograph of his father, his eyes bright. "When I first met you, you reminded me of me a bit. Mom and Dad gone, and you was feeling like you wouldn't fit in at Hogwarts, remember? Not sure you were really up to it. And now look at you, Harry, school champion." He looked at Harry for a moment and said, very seriously, "You know what I'd love, Harry? I'd love you to win. I really would. It'd show 'em all. You don't have to be pureblood to do it. You don't have to be ashamed of what you are. It'd show 'em Dumbledore's the one who's got it right, letting anyone in as long as they can do magic. How are you doing with that egg, Harry?" "Great," said Harry. "Really great." Hagrid's miserable face broke into a wide, watery smile. "That's my boy. You show 'em, Harry. You show 'em. Beat 'em all." Lying to Hagrid wasn't quite like lying to anyone else. Harry went back to the castle later that afternoon with Ron and Hermione, unable to banish the image of the happy expression on Hagrid's whiskery face as he had imagined Harry winning the tournament. The incomprehensible egg weighed more heavily than ever on Harry's conscience that evening, and by the time he got into bed, he had made up his mind. It was time to shelve his pride and see if Cedric's hint was worth anything. End of chapter 24. Oh, we have more people coming in. What's up? So, who wants another chapter? We could read chapter 25 next. I could stop here, or we could read one more chapter. Maybe one more? What do you think? I think I want to read another one. Let's read the next one. We're reading Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. We're more than halfway through the book now. We're on chapter 25. Just need to breathe because I need to make sure I have enough air. It's a lot of reading, you know. Let me reboot my cameras. Did I do that right? Yeah, I think so. Chapter 25, The Egg and the Eye. As Harry had no idea how long of a bath he would need to work out the secret of the golden egg, he decided to do it at night, when he would be able to take as much time as he wanted. Reluctant though he was to accept more favors from Cedric, he also decided to use the prefect's bathroom. Far fewer people were allowed in there, so it was much less likely that he would be disturbed. Harry planned his excursion carefully, because he had been caught out of bed and out of bounds by Filch the caretaker in the middle of the night once before, and had no desire to repeat the experience. The invisibility cloak would, of course, be essential, as an added precaution. Oh, and as an added precaution, Harry thought he would take the Marauder's map, which next to the cloak was the most useful aid to rule-breaking Harry owned. The map showed the whole of Hogwarts, including its many shortcuts and secret passageways, and, most important of all, it revealed the people inside the castle as minuscule labeled dots, moving around the corridors, so that Harry would be forewarned if someone was approaching the bathroom. On Thursday night, Harry sneaked up to bed, put on the cloak, crept back downstairs, and, just as he had done on the night when Hagrid had shown him the dragons, waited for the portrait hole to open. This time it was Ron who waited outside to give the fat lady the password, banana fritters. "Good luck," Ron muttered, climbing into the room as Harry crept out past him. It was awkward moving under the cloak tonight, because Harry had the heavy egg under one arm and the map held in front of his nose with the other. However, the moonlit corridors were empty and silent, and by checking the map at strategic intervals, Harry was able to ensure that he wouldn't run into anyone he wanted to avoid. When he reached the statue of Boris the Bewildered, a lost-looking wizard with his gloves on the wrong hands, he located the right door, leaned close to it, and muttered the password, "Pine Fresh," just as Cedric had told him. The door creaked open. Harry slipped inside, bolted the door behind him, and pulled off the invisibility cloak, looking around. His immediate reaction was that it would be worth becoming a prefect just to be able to use this bathroom. It was softly lit by a splendid candle-filled chandelier, and everything was made of white marble, including what looked like an empty, rectangular swimming pool sunk into the middle of the floor. About 100 golden taps stood all around the pool's edges, each with a differently colored jewel set into its handle. There was also a diving board. Long, white linen curtains hung at the windows, a large pile of fluffy white towels sat in a corner, and there was a single golden framed painting on the wall. It featured a blonde mermaid who was fast asleep on a rock, her long hair over her face. It fluttered every time she snored. Harry moved forward, looking around, his footsteps echoing off the walls. Magnificent though the bathroom was, and quite keen he was to try out a few of those taps. Now he was here, he couldn't quite suppress the feeling that Cedric might have been having him on. How on earth was this supposed to help solve the mystery of the egg? Nevertheless, he put one of the fluffy towels, the cloak, the map, and the egg at the side of the swimming pool-sized bath, and then knelt down and turned on a few of the taps. He could tell at once that they carried different sorts of bubble bath mixed with water, though it wasn't a bubble bath as Harry had ever experienced it. One tap gushed pink and blue bubbles the size of footballs. Another poured ice-white foam so thick that Harry thought it would have supported his weight if he cared to test it. A third sent heavily perfumed purple clouds hovering over the surface of the water. Harry amused himself for a while, turning the taps on and off, particularly enjoying the effect of one whose jet bounced off the surface of the water in large arcs. Then, when the deep pool was full of hot water, foam, and bubbles, which took a very short time considering its size, Harry turned off all the taps, pulled off his pajamas, slippers, and dressing gown, and slid into the water. It was so deep that his feet barely touched the bottom, and he actually did a couple lengths before swimming back to the side and treading water, staring at the egg. Highly enjoyable though it was to swim in a hot and foamy water with clouds of different color steam wafting all around him. No stroke of brilliance came to him, no sudden burst of understanding. Harry stretched out his arms, lifted the egg in his wet hands, and opened it. The wailing, screeching sound filled the bathroom, echoing and reverberating off the marble walls, but it sounded just as incomprehensible as ever, if not more so with all the echoes. He snapped it shut again, worried that the sound would attract Filch, wondering whether that hadn't been Cedric's plan, and then, making him jump so badly that he dropped the egg, which clattered away across the bathroom floor, someone spoke. "I'd try putting it in the water if I were you." Harry had swallowed a considerable amount of bubbles in shock. He stood up, sputtering, and saw the ghost of a very glum-looking girl sitting cross-legged at the top of one of the taps. It was moaning Myrtle, who was usually to be heard sobbing in the S-bend of a toilet 3 floors below. "Myrtle!" Harry said in outrage. I'm not wearing anything." The foam was so dense that this hardly mattered, but he had a nasty feeling that Myrtle had been spying on him from one of the taps ever since he had arrived. "I closed my eyes when you got in," she said, blinking at him through her thick spectacles. "You haven't been to see me for ages." "Yeah, well," said Harry, bending his knees slightly, just to make absolutely sure Myrtle couldn't see anything but his head. "I'm not supposed to come into your bathroom, am I? It's a girl's one." "You didn't used to care," said Myrtle miserably. "You used to be in there all the time." This was true, though only because Harry, Ron, and Hermione had found Myrtle's out-of-order toilets a convenient place to brew a polyjuice potion in secret, a forbidden potion that turned him and Ron into living replicas of Crabbe and Goyle for an hour, so that they could sneak into the Slytherin common room. "I got told off for going in there," said Harry, which was half true. Percy had once caught him coming out of Myrtle's bathroom. "I thought I'd better not come back after that." "Oh, I see," said Myrtle, picking at a spot on her chin in a morose sort of way. "Well, anyway, I tried the egg in the water. That's what Cedric Diggory did." "Have you been spying on him too?" said Harry indignantly. "What do? Sneak up here in the evenings to watch the prefects take baths?" "Sometimes," said Myrtle, rather slyly. But I've never come out to speak to anyone before." "I'm honored," said Harry darkly. "You keep your eyes shut." He made sure Myrtle had her glasses well covered before hoisting himself out of the bath, wrapping the towel firmly around his waist and going to retrieve the egg. Once he was back in the water, Myrtle peered through her fingers and said, "Go on, then. Open it underwater." Harry lowered the egg beneath the foamy surface and opened it, and this time it did not wail. A gurgling song was coming out of it, a song whose words he couldn't distinguish through the water. "You need to put your head under, too," said Myrtle, who seemed to be thoroughly enjoying bossing him around. "Go on." Harry took a great breath and slid under the surface. And now, sitting on the marble bottom of the bubble-filled bath, he heard a chorus of eerie voices singing to him from the open egg in his hands. "Come seek us where our voices sound. We cannot sing above the ground. And while you're searching, ponder this. We've taken what you'll sorely miss. An hour long you'll have to look and recover what we took. But past an hour, the prospect's black. Too late, it's gone. It won't come back." Harry let himself float back upwards and broke the bubbly surface, shaking his hair out of his eyes. "Hear it," said Myrtle. "Yeah. Come seek us where our voices sound. And if I need persuading... Hang on, I need to listen again." He sank back beneath the water. It took 3 more underwater renditions of the egg song before Harry had it memorized. Then he trod water for a while, thinking hard, while Myrtle sat and watched him. "I've got to go and look for people who can't use their voices above the ground," he said slowly. Who could that be?" "Slow, aren't you?" He had never seen Moaning Myrtle so cheerful, apart from the day when a dose of Polyjuice potion had given Hermione the hairy face and tail of a cat. Harry stared around the bathroom, thinking. If the voices could only be heard underwater, then it made sense for them to belong to underwater creatures. He ran this theory past Myrtle, who smirked at him. Well, that's what Diggory thought, she said. He lay there talking to himself for ages about it. Ages and ages. Nearly all the bubbles had gone. Underwater, Harry said slowly. Myrtle, what lives in the lake apart from the giant squid? Oh, all sorts, she said. I sometimes go down there. Sometimes don't have any choice if someone flushes my toilet when I'm not expecting it. Trying not to think about Moaning Myrtle zooming down a pipe to the lake with the contents of a toilet, Harry said, Well, does anything in there have a human voice? Hang on. Harry's eyes had fallen on the picture of the snoozing mermaid on the wall. Myrtle, there aren't merpeople in there, are there? Ooh, very good, she said, her thick glasses twinkling. It took Diggory much longer than that. And that was with her awake, too. Myrtle jerked her head towards the mermaid with an expression of great dislike on her glum face, giggling and showing off and flashing her fins. That's it, isn't it? Said Harry excitedly. The second task is to go and find the merpeople in the lake, and... But he suddenly realized what he was saying, and he felt the excitement drain out of him as though someone had just pulled a plug in his stomach. He wasn't a very good swimmer. He never had much practice. Dudley had had lessons in his youth, but Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon, no doubt hoping that Harry would drown one day, hadn't bothered to give him any. A couple of lengths of this bath were all very well, but that lake was very large and very deep, and merpeople would surely live right at the bottom. Myrtle, Harry said slowly, how am I supposed to breathe? At this, Myrtle's eyes filled with sudden tears again. Tactless, she muttered, groping in her robes for the handkerchief. What's tactless? Said Harry, bewildered. Talking about breathing in front of me, she said shrilly, and her voice echoed loudly around the bathroom. When I can't, when I haven't, not for ages. She buried her face in her handkerchief and sniffed loudly. Harry remembered how touchy Myrtle had been about being dead, but none of the other ghosts he knew made such a fuss about it. Sorry, he said impatiently. I didn't mean. I just forgot. Oh, yes, very easy to forget Myrtle's dead, said Myrtle, gulping, looking at him out of swollen eyes. Nobody missed me even when I was alive. Took them hours and hours to find my body. I know, I was sitting there waiting for them. Olive Hornby came into the bathroom. Are you in here again, sulking, Myrtle, she said, because Professor Dippet asked me to look for you. And then she saw my body. Ooh, she didn't forget it until her dying day, I made sure of that. Followed her around and reminded her I did. I remembered at my brother's wedding. But Harry wasn't listening. He was thinking about the Merpeople song again. We've taken what you'll sorely miss. That sounded as though they were going to steal something of his, something he had to get back. What were they going to take? And then, of course, she went to the Ministry of Magic to stop me stalking her, and I had to come back here and live in my toilet. Good, said Harry vaguely. Well, I'm a lot further on than I was. Shut your eyes again, will you? I'm getting out. He retrieved the egg from the bottom of the bath, climbed out, dried himself, pulled on his pajamas and dressing gown again. Will you come and visit me in my bathroom again sometime? Moaning Myrtle asked mournfully as Harry picked up the invisibility cloak. I'll try, said Harry, though privately thinking the only way he'd be visiting Myrtle's bathroom again was if every other toilet in the castle got blocked. See you, Myrtle. Thanks for your help. Bye-bye, she said gloomily, and as Harry put on the invisibility cloak, he saw her zoom back up the tap. Out in the dark corridor, Harry examined the Marauder's map to check that the coast was clear. Yes, the dots belonging to Filch and his cat, Mrs. Norris, were safely in their office. Nothing else seemed to be moving apart from Peeves, though he was bouncing around the trophy room on the floor above. Harry had taken his first step back toward Gryffindor Tower when something else on the map caught his eye, something distinctly odd. Peeves was not the only thing that was moving. A single dot was flitting around a room in the bottom left-hand corner, Snape's office. But the dot wasn't labeled Severus Snape. It was Bartimus Crouch. Bartamius Crouch. Harry stared at the dot. Mr. Crouch was supposed to be too ill to go to work, or to come to the Yule Ball, so what was he doing sneaking into Hogwarts at 1 o'clock in the morning? Harry watched closely as the dot moved around and around the room, pausing here and there. Harry hesitated, thinking, and then his curiosity got the better of him. He turned and set off in the opposite direction, towards the nearest staircase. He was going to see what Crouch was up to. Harry walked down the stairs as quietly as possible, though the faces in some of the portraits still turned cautiously at the squeak of a floorboard, the rustle of his pajamas. He crept along the corridor below, pushing aside a tapestry about halfway long, and proceeded down a narrower staircase, a shortcut that would take him down 2 floors. He kept glancing down at the map, wondering. It just didn't seem in character somehow for correct, law-abiding Mr. Crouch to be sneaking around someone's office this late at night. And then, halfway down the staircase, not thinking about what he was doing, not concentrating on anything but the peculiar behavior of Mr. Crouch, Harry's leg suddenly sank through the trick step that Neville always forgot to jump. He gave an ungainly wobble, and the golden egg, still damp from the bath, slipped from under his arm. He lurched forward to try to catch it, but it was too late. The egg fell down the long staircase with a bang as loud as a bass drum on every step. The invisibility cloak slipped. Harry snatched at it, and the Marauder's map fluttered out of his hand and slid down 6 stairs, where, sunk in the step to above his knee, he couldn't reach it. The golden egg fell through the tapestry at the bottom of the staircase, burst open, and began wailing loudly in the corridor below. Harry pulled out his wand and struggled to touch the Marauder's map to wipe it blank, but it was too far away to reach. Pulling the cloak back over himself, Harry straightened up, listening hard with his eyes screwed up with fear, and, almost immediately, Peeves! It was the unmistakable hunting cry of Filch the caretaker. Harry could hear his rapid, shuffling footsteps coming nearer and nearer, his wheezy voice raised in fury. "What's this racket? Wake up the whole castle, will you? I'll have you, Peeves. I'll have you. You'll... And what is this?" Filch's footsteps halted. There was a clink of metal on metal, and the wailing stopped. Filch had picked up the egg and closed it. Harry stood very still, one leg still jammed tightly in the magical step, listening. Any moment now, Filch was going to pull aside the tapestry, expecting to see Peeves, and there would be no Peeves, but if he came up the step, he would spot the Marauder's map. And, invisibility cloak or not, the map would show Harry Potter standing exactly where he was. "Egg?" Filch said quietly at the foot of the stairs. "My sweet." Mrs. Norris was obviously with him. "This is a Triwizard clue. This belongs to a school champion." Harry felt sick, his heart hammering very fast. "Peeves!" Filch roared gleefully. "You've been stealing." He ripped back the tapestry below, and Harry saw his horrible pouchy face and bulging pale eyes staring up the dark and... to Filch... staring up the dark and deserted staircase to Filch. Deserted to Filch, right? "Hiding, are you?" he said softly. "I'm coming to get you, Peeves. You've gone and stole a Triwizard clue, Peeves. Dumbledore will have you out for this, you filthy, pilfering poltergeist." Filch started to climb the stairs, his scrawny, dust-colored cat at his heels. Mrs. Norris's lamp-like eyes, so very like her master's, were fixed distinctly upon Harry. He had had occasion before now to wonder whether the invisibility cloak worked on cats. Sick with apprehension, he watched Filch drawing nearer and nearer in his old flannel dressing gown. He tried desperately to pull his trapped leg free, but it merely sank a few more inches. Any second now, Filch was going to spot the map or walk right into him. "Filch, what's going on?" Filch stopped a few steps below Harry and turned. At the foot of the stairs stood the only person who could make Harry's situation worse. Snape. He was wearing a long gray nightshirt, and he looked livid. It's Peeves, Professor, Filch whispered malevolently. He threw this egg down the stairs. Snape climbed up the stairs quickly and stopped beside Filch. Harry gritted his teeth, convinced his loudly thumping heart would give him away at any second. Peeves, said Snape softly, staring at the egg in Filch's hands. But Peeves couldn't get into my office. This egg was in your office, Professor. Of course not, Snape snapped. I heard banging and wailing. Yes, Professor, that was the egg. I was coming to investigate. Peeves threw it, Professor. And when I passed my office, I saw that the torches were lit and a cupboard door was ajar. Somebody has been searching it. But Peeves couldn't. I know he couldn't, Filch, Snape snapped again. I seal my office with a spell none but a wizard could break. Snape looked up the stairs, straight through Harry, and then down into the corridor below. I want you to come and help me search for the intruder, Filch. Yes, Professor, but... Filch looked yearningly up the stairs, right through Harry, who could see that he was very reluctant to forego the chance of cornering Peeves. Go, Harry pleaded with him silently. Go with Snape, go. Mrs. Norris was peering around Filch's legs. Harry had the distinct impression that she could smell him. Why had he filled that bath with so much perfumed foam? The thing is, Professor, said Filch plaintively, the headmaster will have to listen to me this time. Peeves has been stealing from a student. It might be my chance to get him thrown out of the castle once and for all. Filch, I don't give a damn about that wretched poltergeist. It's my office that's... Clunk, clunk, clunk. Snape stopped talking very abruptly. He and Filch both looked down at the foot of the stairs. Harry saw Mad-Eye Moody limp into sight through the narrow gap between their heads. Moody was wearing his old traveling cloak over his nightshirt and leaning on his staff as usual. Pajama party, is it? He growled up the stairs. Professor Snape and I heard noises, Professor, said Filch at once. Peeves the poltergeist, throwing things around as usual. And then Professor Snape discovered that someone had broken into his office. Shut up, Snape hissed to Filch. Moody took a step closer to the foot of the stairs. Harry saw Moody's magical eye travel over Snape and then unmistakably onto himself. Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. Moody could see through invisibility cloaks. He alone could see the full strangeness of the scene. Snape in his nightshirt, Filch clutching the egg, and he, Harry, trapped in the stairs behind him. Moody's lopsided gash of a mouth opened in surprise. For a few seconds, he and Harry stared straight into each other's eyes. Then Moody closed his mouth and turned his blue eye upon Snape again. Did I hear that correctly, Snape? He said slowly. Someone broke into your office. It is unimportant, said Snape coldly. On the contrary, growled Moody, it is very important. You'd want to break into your office. A student, I dare say, said Snape. Harry could see a vein flickering horribly on Snape's greasy temple. It has happened before. Potion ingredients have gone missing from my private store cupboard. Students attempting illicit mixtures, no doubt. Reckon they were going after potion ingredients, eh? Said Moody. Not hiding anything else in your office, are you? Harry saw the edge of Snape's sallow face turn a nasty brick color, the vein in his temple pulsing more rapidly. You know I'm hiding nothing, Moody, he said in a soft and dangerous voice, as you've searched my office pretty thoroughly yourself. Moody's face twisted into a smile. Order's privilege, Snape. Dumbledore told me to keep an eye. Dumbledore happens to trust me, said Snape through clenched teeth. I refuse to believe he gave you orders to search my office. Of course Dumbledore trusts you, growled Moody. He's a trusting man, isn't he? Believes in second chances. But me, I say there are spots that don't come off, Snape. Spots that never come off. Do you know what I mean? Snape suddenly did something very strange. He seized his left forearm convulsively with his right hand, as though something on it had hurt him. Moody laughed. Get back to bed, Snape. You don't have the authority to send me anywhere, Snape hissed, letting go of his arm as though angry with himself. I have as much right to prowl the school after dark as you do. prowl away, said Moody, but his voice was full of menace. I look forward to meeting you in a dark corridor sometime. You've dropped something, by the way. With a stab of horror, Harry saw Moody point at the Marauder's map, still lying on the staircase 6 steps below him. As Snape and Filch both turned to look at it, Harry threw caution to the winds. He raised his arms under the cloak and waved furiously at Moody to attract his attention, mouthing, "It's mine! Mine!" Snape had reached out for it, a horrible expression of dawning comprehension on his face. Accio parchment. The map flew back up into the air, slipped through Snape's outstretched fingers, and soared down the stairs into Moody's hand. My mistake, Moody said calmly. It's mine. Must have dropped it earlier. But Snape's black eyes were darting from the egg in Filch's arms to the map in Moody's hand, and Harry could tell he was putting 2 and 2 together, as only Snape could. Potter, he said quietly. What's that? Said Moody calmly, folding up the map and pocketing it. Potter, Snape snarled, and he actually turned his head and stared right at the place where Harry was, as though he could suddenly see him. That egg is Potter's egg. That piece of parchment belongs to Potter. I have seen it before. I recognize it. Potter is here. Potter in his invisibility cloak. Snape stretched out his hands like a blind man and began to move up the stairs. Harry could have sworn his overlarge nostrils were dilating, trying to sniff Harry out. Trapped, Harry leaned backward, trying to avoid Snape's fingertips. But any moment now... There's nothing there, Snape, barked Moody. But I'll be happy to tell the headmaster how quickly your mind jumped to Harry Potter. Meaning what? Snape turned back to look at Moody, his hands still outstretched, inches from Harry's chest. Meaning that Dumbledore is very interested to know who's got it in for that boy, said Moody, limping nearer still to the foot of the stairs. And so am I, Snape, very interested. The torchlight flickered across his mangled face so that the scars and the chunk missing from his nose looked deeper and darker than ever. Snape was looking down at Moody, and Harry couldn't see the expression on his face. For a moment, nobody moved or said anything. Then Snape slowly lowered his hands. I merely thought, said Snape, in a voice of forced calm, that if Potter was wandering after hours again, it's an unfortunate habit of his. He should be stopped for his own safety. Ah, I see, said Moody softly. Got Potter's best interests at heart, have you? There was a pause. Snape and Moody were still staring at each other. Mrs. Norris gave a loud meow, still peering around Filch's legs, looking for the source of Harry's bubble bath smell. I think I will go back to bed, Snape said curtly. Best idea you've had all night, said Moody. Now, Filch, if you'll just give me that egg. No, said Filch, clutching the egg as though it were his firstborn son. Professor Moody, this is evidence of Peeves' treachery. It's property of the champion he stole it from, said Moody. Hand it over now. Snape swept downstairs and passed Moody without another word. Filch made a chirruping noise to Mrs. Norris, who stared blankly at Harry for a few more seconds before turning and following her master. Still breathing very fast, Harry heard Snape walking away down the corridor. Filch handed Moody the egg and disappeared from view too, muttering to Mrs. Norris, Never mind, my sweet. We'll see Dumbledore in the morning. Tell him what Peeves was up to. A door slammed. Harry was left staring down at Moody, who placed his staff on the bottommost stair and started to climb laboriously toward him, a dull clunk on every other step. Close shave, Potter, he muttered. Yeah, thanks, said Harry weakly. What is this thing, said Moody, drawing the Marauder's map out of his pocket and unfolding it. Map of Hogwarts, said Harry, hoping Moody was going to pull him out of the staircase soon. His leg was really hurting him. Merlin's beard, Moody whispered, staring at the map, his magical eye going haywire. This is some map, Potter. Yeah, it's quite useful, Harry said. His eyes were starting to water from the pain. Professor Moody, do you think you could help me? What? Oh, yes, of course. Moody took hold of Harry's arms and pulled. Harry's leg came free of the trick step, and he climbed onto the one above it. Moody was still gazing at the map. Potter, he said slowly, you didn't happen, by any chance, to see who broke into Snape's office, did you? On this map, I mean. Yeah, I did, Harry admitted. It was Mr. Crouch. Moody's magical eye whizzed over the entire surface of the map. He suddenly looked alarmed. Crouch, he said. You're sure, Potter? Positive, said Harry. Well, he's not here anymore, said Moody, his eyes still whizzing over the map. Crouch. That's very, very interesting. He said nothing for almost a minute, still staring at the map. Harry could tell that this news meant something to Moody, and very much wanted to know what it was. He wondered whether he dared ask. Moody scared him slightly, yet Moody had just helped him avoid an awful lot of trouble. Professor Moody, why do you reckon Mr. Crouch wanted to look around Snape's office? Moody's magical eye left the map and fixed quivering upon Harry. It was a penetrating glare, and Harry had the impression that Moody was sizing him up, wondering whether to answer or not, or how much to tell him. Put it this way, Potter, Moody muttered finally. They say old Mad Eye's obsessed with catching dark wizards, but I'm nothing compared to Barty Crouch. He continued to stare at the map. Harry was burning to know more. Professor Moody, he said again, do you think... could this have anything to do with... maybe Mr. Crouch thinks there's something going on? Like what? Said Moody sharply. Harry wondered how much he dare say. He didn't want Moody to guess that he had a source of information outside Hogwarts. That might lead to tricky questions about Sirius. I don't know, Harry muttered. Odd stuff's been happening lately, hasn't it? It's been in the Daily Prophet, the Dark Mark at the World Cup, and the Death Eaters and everything. Both of Moody's mismatched eyes widened. You're a sharp boy, Potter, he said. His magical eye roved back to the Marauder's map. Crouch could be thinking along those lines, he said slowly. Very possible. There have been some funny rumors flying around lately. Helped along by Rita Skeeter, of course. It's making a lot of people nervous, I reckon. A grim smile twisted his lopsided mouth. Oh, if there's one thing I hate, he muttered, more to himself than to Harry, and his magical eye was fixed on the left-hand corner of the map. It's a Death Eater who walked free. Harry stared at him. Could Moody possibly mean what Harry thought he meant? And now I want to ask you a question, Potter, said Moody in a more business-like tone. Harry's heart sank. He had thought this was coming. Moody was going to ask him where he had got this map, which is a very dubious magical object, and the story of how it had fallen into his hands incriminated not only him, but his own father, Fred and George Weasley, and Professor Lupin, their last Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Moody waved the map in front of Harry, who braced himself. Can I borrow this? Oh, said Harry. He was very fond of his map, but on the other hand, he was extremely relieved that Moody wasn't asking where he'd got it, and there was no doubt that he owed Moody a favor. Yeah, okay. Good boy, growled Moody. I can make good use of this. This might be exactly what I've been looking for. Right, bed, Potter. Come on now. They climbed to the top of the stairs together, Moody still examining the map, as though it were a treasure the like of which he had never seen before. They had walked in silence to the door of Moody's office, where he stopped and looked up at Harry. You ever thought of a career as an Auror, Potter? No, said Harry, taken aback. You want to consider it, said Moody, nodding and looking at Harry thoughtfully. Yes, indeed. And incidentally, I'm guessing you weren't just taking that egg for a walk tonight. No, said Harry, grinning. I've been working out the clue. Moody winked at him, his magical eye going haywire again. Nothing like a nighttime stroll to give you ideas, Potter. See you in the morning. He went back into his office, staring down at the Marauder's map again, and closed the door behind him. Harry walked slowly back to Gryffindor Tower, lost in thought about Snape and Crouch and what it all meant. Why was Crouch pretending to be ill if he had managed to get to Hogwarts when he wanted to? What did he think Snape was concealing in his office? And Moody thought Harry, ought to be an Auror. Interesting idea. But somehow, Harry thought, as he got quietly into his four-poster 10 minutes later, the egg and the cloak now safely back in his trunk, he thought he'd like to check how scarred the rest of them were before he chose it as a career. End of chapter 25. Alright, the next chapter will be the second task, but I just did over 3 hours of reading, so I think that's probably the end of this one. Did Myrtle see Harry nude? Who knows? Maybe at the beginning. Filch's cat can see through the invisibility cloak. Harry suspects that's true, but it's not confirmed. It could just be that Mrs. Norris like freaks Harry out and Harry assumes it. Or that maybe Mrs. Norris could smell Harry, something like that. Alright, well, that'll be the end of the reading for today, because I don't want to like wear out my voice too much, I guess. And now I will try to figure out what I'm doing for the rest of the day, because I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, that's it. We're working our way through this book. There's still quite a lot of chapters, though. It's a pretty long one. It's one of the longer ones. Kind of. Yep, thanks for tuning in. And see you next time, which might be tomorrow. It might be tomorrow. I don't have any like commentary on what we just read, really. I can't really talk about stuff without spoilers too much, I guess. And I actually forgot some of the details too. It's been like over 10 years since I read this. So, all right. See you next time.